You are live.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another, second full day of training with Police Department of Cleveland. And we're going to begin this morning. Do we have to do a roll call for this meeting?
You probably should for the record. You know, just technically it is a meeting. It's just a training meeting. So,
Okay. I know, I always need. Will you do the roll call for me, please, co-chair?
Sure. Commissioner Benito?
Present.
Commissioner Dr. Adams?
Present.
Commissioner White? Present. Commissioner Reed?
Present.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Present.
Chair Ridgway?
Present.
Commissioner Wong?
Present.
Commissioner?
Sure.
Sure. Commissioner Van Leer?
Present.
Chair Rodriguez? Present.
And
Did they get it?
we're okay.
And so we know we have excused absences for Commissioner Carr Early and Commissioner Donaldson. And I think we have another one of the commissioners, Commissioner Garrett Ferguson, who is en route. So we will get started. We'll be a few minutes after where we started. Where we said we would start, but I would like to begin by introducing Lieutenant K. Ryan. I'm reading his name off of his shirt. And with the Cleveland Police Department, he works with the in personnel training, but today he'll be doing something else for us. And we will give him the opportunity to introduce himself, and that way he can mention what's most important about himself. And I won't omit anything that is. So it's all yours, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Lieutenant Kenneth Ryan. I'm currently in charge of the personnel section with the division. So I'm in charge of the personnel tracking, the timekeeping unit, the medical unit, and the background investigators. So that's currently my role. Prior to this role, I worked as the officer in charge of the Cleveland Police Academy, and I'm also an Opado commander. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking and discussing and going over, I have either instructed the division or I was instrumental in the training aspect of it. So that's why they asked me to come in and hit on some of these topics. Further, we'll get to it after lunch. When we talk about ABLE, the active bystandership for law enforcement, I was the division's ABLE coordinator. And like, once again, we'll talk about it after lunch, but every ABLE division has to have a coordinator. So I was the coordinator for the division. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
As I present, are we going to do questions at the end or questions throughout?
I was going to ask you that question actually right before you started to
Okay.
see what your preference would be. Would you prefer to just make your presentation? We jot down our questions for ourselves, and then at the end of your presentation, we can ask, and that way at least you can get through.
That whatever's easier for the group.
I'm okay with Lieutenant Ryan completing his presentation, and then we come in and ask questions afterwards. Is that okay with everybody? I agree. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So that'll be the.
Okay. So for my search and seizure block, I'm scheduled for an hour, so I'll probably try to finish up in 30 to 40 minutes because there's going to be a lot of questions on this block. Okay. Anything else I need to cover before we begin on the search and seizure? Okay. All right. So in 2020, the division implemented 5 new search and seizure policies. Prior to that, the policies have not been updated since 2002. So there was a huge gap in updating of the policies. And if you don't know, or maybe you do, Supreme Court case law, and we'll discuss it as we go through, is constantly updating and changing. So there could be potentially hundreds of case law updates that were not relayed in official policy. They may be been communicated through divisional notice or some other means, but our official divisional policy was not updated since 2002. So in 2020, the division updated the policies and they made 5 new policies. Those policies were a lot of new information, and it went from a policy of about 10 pages to a policy of about 60 to 70 pages. So there was a lot of new information and material that was taught to our members. So the policies were investigatory stops, search and seizure, Miranda, strip searches and body cavity searches, and probable cause and warrantless arrest. Those were the 5 policies. About a year or so after that, they came out with a stops form policy, which you'll have a class on after me, and that is just our data collection. And Sergeant Cook will discuss it. It's not really a search and seizure policy. It's how we're documenting and tracking our interactions with the public. Okay. So pursuant to the training in 2020 and the policies in 2020, we designed a new training for members. So we began with a e-learning assignment. So all the members received the policies, an e-learning assignment, some scenario-based training, and a test on the policies that they had to complete before they came to training, so that we knew that they had an understanding of the policies coming in. When they came in, we gave them about a 2-hour lecture over certain important parts of policy. In that lecture, we had a City of Cleveland prosecutor co-teaching with us. So I taught the class, and a City of Cleveland prosecutor co-taught with me. The idea behind that was I would handle policy-related questions and information, and the City of Cleveland prosecutor could kind of handle that minutia of law and case law and the things that they're seeing on their end. So we kind of did it together, and our officers really responded to it. So after that 2-hour lecture, we did a scenario-based training. We did 3 modules where we put our officers through scenarios based on the new policies that the officers had to successfully complete to pass the training. And there was assessment sheets and training matrices that officers had to hit key points to pass the module. So that was 2020. In 2021, well, we did something a little bit different. We like to use that e-learning model as a primer. We call it a preload, so that all the officers get the same information coming in, and we're comfortable that we can kind of go on a little higher level than just information in the policies. So what we did was we brought them in. The class was co-taught that year by a Cuyahoga County prosecutor. Same thing, co-taught. I handled the policy and procedures, and the county prosecutor handled the fine details of the case law. We did a 4-hour lecture because what we found in our 2-hour lecture was officers felt like they were not getting enough information in the lecture. They wanted to get into a lot more fine detail and points to get a better understanding. So one thing that we discuss in training is the disagreements back and forth. So there could be different people view things in a different way. And one thing that I would routinely bring up is the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has 9 justices. And even most of the time, those 9 justices don't even agree on things. So in the class, there's spirited debate, there's going back and forth, but we always anchor any training with the policy. The policy is going to not let them down, and they're going to follow it, and they'll have a general guideline of exactly what they're supposed to do, regardless of the case law. The reason I bring that up is because to understand the search and seizure policy, you kind of have to get an understanding. Bless you.
Thank you.
You kind of have to get an understanding of how case law works in relation to the police department. Okay, so the Supreme Court, they see a case, and they make a ruling or an opinion, and it's very broad. Okay, then it comes down to the state, and the state will rule on and kind of adjust that ruling. So the state's ruling can be more restrictive, but it can't be wider. Okay. Then it gets to the city, and the city does the same. And then it gets to the chief, and the chief is the one that makes the final decision on what the officers are expected to do. Now, I'll just give you a brief example. This is not an ongoing issue, but it's just something that I think I can clarify. So let's say the Supreme Court tomorrow makes a decision that officers can chase individuals for any reason. Let's pretend that happens. That's going to go to the state. The state's going to rule on it, and then eventually it's going to get down to the chief. And the chief can say, that's not appropriate. Our officers are only going to chase individuals under these very specific circumstances. So the Supreme Court makes a broad ruling. It gets down to our level, and the chief and others can make it more restrictive. Does that make sense? Okay. So in 2021, what we did in our training program was we did the 4-hour lecture. We tried to give them the best understanding we could of both case law and policy. And we did some more scenario-based training, but it was a little bit different. We actually teamed with TV20, and we shot a training video of officers doing a traffic stop. And we used their actors, so we had a traffic stop. And during the video, we stopped it in specific parts, and we asked questions to the officers. What is expected of the officer? What should they do? What they should not do? And we kind of walked them down the path of exactly what is expected of them during that traffic stop. The other module that we designed was a tabletop exercise. So we broke all the officers up into individual groups, not individual groups, but groups. And we gave them a series of scenarios where they had to work together to find the best answers to the issues that were raised during the scenario. Then we came back together, we discussed them, and then the instructor and the prosecutor could anchor that information so that officers understand exactly what was expected. Okay? All right, so that's kind of our background on the policy and the training. Going forward in 22, 23, and continuing, we're going to use a model that is not specific search and seizure training. Okay, so the officer is not going to go to a class and we're going to say, this is your search and seizure training. It's not really what we're going to do anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to do what's called integrated reality-based scenario training. And what that is the officer is going to get a scenario or a set of scenarios and is going to be expected to utilize search and seizure, use of force, bias-free, and any other divisional policies that are appropriate in that scenario. Because that's what the officer is going to face on the road. They're not going to come in and say, well, my problem is a search and seizure problem, right? They're going to say, this is a scenario, you need to figure out what to do. And as we build the matrix, we still have our very specific elements that the officer has to hit to pass that scenario, okay? So that's a background of our training. So I'm going to give you a very high-level overview of some of our policies. Like I said, they're about 70 pages, so I can't go line by line, and obviously I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I'm just going to give you a general understanding. Do you have copies of the outline as well, or no? Some do, some don't?
Yeah, I
Okay.
printed mine off.
Okay. It's okay if you don't necessarily need them, but so our first policy that we're gonna discuss is our investigatory stops policy. In our investigatory stops policy, we discuss 3 levels of police-civilian interaction, okay? And those 3 levels is going to be a consensual encounter, it's going to be an investigatory stop, which is also called a Terry stop, and it's going to be an arrest. Those are our 3 levels of citizen-civilian interaction. So a consensual encounter is, I go to the store, I'm getting coffee, I'm talking to a member of the community, we're just having a brief conversation. The individual feels that they're free to leave at any time, they can terminate the encounter whenever they want. That is what is known as a consensual encounter. A investigatory stop or a Terry stop, the officer has to have reasonable articulable suspicion that a crime is either being committed, is about to be committed, or was committed to detain that individual. Okay, the key word and the word that we hammer over and over and over again is reasonable articulable suspicion. You have to be able to explain in simple terms why you believe this was occurring for that investigatory stop to be proper. That's number 3. And then, number 2. And number 3, and everyone's familiar with this, is just a formal arrest. That officer has probable cause to believe that this individual committed a crime, and this individual is going to be arrested and processed in county booking, okay? So we also discussed police conduct during the stop. okay? Where it gets very unclear for officers, and even it took me a while to get a full understanding, is what the scope of the stop is, okay? What the scope of the stop is. So that means if I make a investigatory stop on an individual and that person is not free to leave, how long am I allowed to hold that person, and what am I permitted? I don't like to use the word allowed. What am I permitted to do to satisfy my investigation? Okay, and that can be sometimes unclear because there's a lot of things that you are permitted and not permitted to do in that situation. And I can give you an example. So you make an investigatory stop on an individual. Does that investigatory stop, I apologize if I ask questions, they're just rhetorical, but you have to answer. So an investigatory stop on an individual, does that automatically authorize you to search that individual? The answer is no. The answer is no. Can you search them? You can if you have, once again, reasonable articulable suspicion that that person is armed and could be a threat to you, okay? So not in every investigatory stop automatically authorizes pat down or a frisk, but you could do that based on more information that you're gathering, okay? I can give you a quick example of that. You get a phone call for a male in a striped shirt and black shorts. You see that individual walking, somebody's reporting he just burglarized a home. An officer sees this individual, can they make a stop on that individual? Can they detain them? The answer is yes. They have reasonable suspicion based on the veracity of the call, meaning we know who the caller is, we have a phone number, it's not anonymous, that person committed a crime. Now that does not necessarily authorize a search, and it definitely doesn't authorize an arrest. You have to get more information. And we do that by interviewing witnesses, interviewing victims, interviewing the person that's being stopped, okay? So because I mentioned anonymous tips, I just want to touch on it briefly. Officers cannot make a stop at an individual based solely on an anonymous tip, okay? And that's hard for some individuals to understand in the police community and outside. If I call the police and there's no callback number, I refuse to give my name, I refuse to give any information, it's anonymous. But I say that individual just burglarized a house. Same individual, striped shirt, black shorts. An officer cannot make a stop on that individual based solely on that anonymous tip alone, okay? But what can an officer do? An officer can make a consensual encounter, talk to them, ask them where they were coming from, get some more information. Now that person is free to leave, okay? However, this is where we sometimes run into trouble because that person is free to leave. The question becomes, does that person feel that they're free to leave, okay? So striped shirt, black shorts, walking down the street, 4 police cars pull up and surround that individual. Would a reasonable individual feel that they're free to leave? Okay, so they just inadvertently converted their consensual encounter into an investigatory stop. Okay, so the reason I'm trying to kind of get this is the exact same thing I teach to officers, the exact quotes. So these are the kinds of things that they're kind of dealing with in real time. They have to orchestrate sometimes, like, hey, you guys stay back. We're going to walk up, kind of just talk to the individual. We're going to have radio continue to try any types of callbacks, get the numbers somehow, okay? All right. Now, we won't get into it too deep, but stop forms. So let's pretend in that scenario I gave you, we have a caller, we have the name and the phone number, calls and says an individual in a striped shirt, black shorts, broke into my home. The officer makes a Terry stop or an investigatory stop on that individual. They discuss it and ends up being unfounded for whatever reason, okay? Officers are required to complete an investigatory stop in our software saying who they stopped and why they stopped them, okay? That information gets forwarded to the supervisor for review and either gets sent back to the officer for a correction, like, hey, be a little more clear here. It gets approved or it gets rejected and gets sent to the commander for further review, okay? So every investigatory stop, including every traffic stop, that officers make is tracked in this data collection software. We call it Brazos. That's what our software is called. All right. So our second policy is our search and seizure. So generally, searches must be made pursuant to a warrant, okay? Generally, searches must be made pursuant to a warrant. However, there are exceptions to the warrant requirement. So the first exception to the warrant requirement is open view, plain view, okay? So what open view, plain view is say an officer is walking down the street, there is a marijuana plant growing in someone's window inside their home. Can an officer do anything? What is an officer permitted to do in that specific situation? Can he go or she go inside the home to retrieve that plant? Answer is no. Now, can an officer do something? Yeah, based on the information, well, yes, they can knock on the door, certainly. But based on the information that he or she received, okay, they can apply for a search warrant and say, I have reason to believe that a crime is being committed. I need a search warrant to go into the house and retrieve the plant, okay? That is a little bit different than just plain view, okay? An officer makes a traffic stop on an individual for a traffic code violation. Let's say did not have the headlights on. An officer is speaking with the person. He or she sees in plain view cocaine in the person's middle section there. The officer can then seize that cocaine because it's in plain view and the person is stopped lawfully, and that person will be charged with that offense. Does that make sense? I don't want to go too far into it, but when we discuss vehicles and houses, there's a lot of difference. The Supreme Court sees a person's home as their domain. They do not want you to go in there without really, there's only 3 reasons you'd be going into someone's home. That would be some type of emergency that, hey, I have to go in there right this second, or somebody could be dead or dying. A warrant, it's a warrant, an emergency, and there's one other one I'll think of. Well, consent.
Okay.
Yeah, consent, a warrant, or some type of like actual emergency, right? So this has happened. This has happened to me personally. You get a call for domestic violence. You walk up, knock on the door, and you hear somebody in there screaming, "He's killing me! He's killing me!" An officer is permitted to go into that house without a warrant and ensure that somebody isn't actively being killed. Okay. Okay. So our second exception to the warrant requirement is consent. Okay, consent. That just means I ask an individual, "Sir, could I please search your car?" And that individual says yes, gives me consent. Okay. So what we tell our officers is you have to be very, very careful with this. And the reason being, just like our investigatory stop, where we don't want to convert our consensual encounter into an investigatory stop, when we ask consent, we have to make sure that we're not doing anything to coerce or intimidate that individual. Okay. And there's a video that is really illustrates this really well. It wasn't in Cleveland. It was in California. And a person was driving the vehicle, and the officer says over and over and over again, "Can I search your car?" And the person just keeps saying no, over and over and over. And eventually the person gives in and says yes, and they had an illegal firearm in their car. And what we discuss during this video is, was this person intimidated or coerced into giving you that consent? If the answer is yes, that the search is invalid. So then we talk about exigent circumstance. An exigent circumstance just means the officer cannot wait for any type of legal action, like any type of warrant or that type of thing. The example of the exigent circumstance that I gave you of the house is a really good example of that. The officer has to act right now to either save somebody's life, or if the individual is attempting to conceal some type of evidence or contraband, to prevent that from occurring. Pat down frisks during investigatory stops. We discussed that not every investigatory stop authorizes a pat down frisk, but they are permitted. Okay, they are permitted, and they're permitted generally. Okay, so when I do an investigatory stop and I believe an individual may be armed, I can pat them down, correct? where can I pat them down? Outer garments is what we teach. Outer garments, okay? The outer garments. That means you can't be reaching in pockets. You can't be going under someone's shirt. Outer garments. Now, if you feel an item that you believe is a weapon, and you have to be able to articulate why you believe that, can you then reach in that area and retrieve that weapon? The answer to that is yes. The answer to that is yes. It's still reasonable suspicion at that point, but once you reach in and you remove that weapon, then yes, we would have probable cause. Okay? Custodial searches, all custodial searches is I'm making an arrest on an individual and I'm going to do a full search. Not a strip search, but a full search, meaning this person is going to jail. I'm checking socks, pockets, anything that could be any type of contraband or used as a weapon inside the jail facility has to be removed from that person, right? So keys have to be removed, any types of cell phones, that type of thing, right? We have to make sure that individuals aren't bringing that into the jail facility. Vehicle inventory searches. Okay, vehicle inventory searches. So I make a traffic stop on an individual who is the owner of the vehicle, does not have a driver's license. Okay, does not have a driver's license. Our policy says that that vehicle can be towed in connection with that traffic stop because we can't let the driver leave in that car without a valid driver's license, right? That really wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? So sometimes we have to tow that vehicle. And pursuant to that tow, because that vehicle is going to be going into police custody, which is lot 2, okay, we have to inventory the vehicle. And that inventory protects the officer from any types of claims of, you took something from my car. It protects the person from when we drop it off. It doesn't get, if something gets removed from that car. And it also protects the towing company because, as you may or may not be aware, we contract out all of our towing, right? So if I need a tow, Kuffner or one of these places is going to come tow the vehicle. So all that information or all that stuff gets inventoried. And generally, we're looking for higher ticket items, right? Cell phones or things in the vehicle that are important. We may write, miscellaneous paperwork in the glove box. We're not going through every single piece, anything like that. But we want to do a good check, including the trunk, under the seats. We're not going to tear anything off or anything like that, but we're going to make sure that there's nothing of value inside that car. All right. And then the next one and the last one is going to be our open fields. There's no warrant requirement in an open field. So in Cleveland, there's open fields. There's maybe some abandoned houses that were taken down. If an individual, let's say you get a call for an individual who robbed a convenience store, okay? That caller says the individual was armed with a weapon. You see that individual described to you, the radio said striped shirt, black shorts. You see that individual, you tell them to stop, they run, okay? Officers can chase that individual based on that information that they have. Now, this person is running through a field and throws what the officer believes is a firearm and just keeps running, okay? The officer, maybe they lose them, maybe they catch them, whatever. The officer can come back, no warrant, and find and retrieve that firearm because it's an open field, okay? It just you really think about it, it makes sense. Why would you need a warrant just for, grass? If you think of I'm trying to think of a park. Like anywhere in any park, just an open grassed area. It doesn't necessarily have to be grassed, but just an open area. Okay. What time am I going till? 9:10. All right. I'm just gonna burn through the last little bit because actually these are much faster. All right. So Miranda, for us, it's important to remember Miranda. Okay, let me back up. So the Miranda warnings are Supreme Court case law that says anytime a suspect is in custody and being questioned about a crime, that individual must be read their Miranda waivers and warnings. Okay? So Same situation as before, individual, there's a call for a burglary, striped shirt, black pants, officer does a full investigation, they have probable cause for an arrest, this person is going to be going to jail. Officer is required to read them their Miranda warnings. And this is common, I'm sure you've seen it on TV or wherever, but you have the right to remain silent, anything you say can and be, that's what Miranda is, okay? But for us, it's important to remember the suspect is in custody and they're going to be questioned about any crime. Now, custody is where it gets gray because a traffic stop is technically not custody, right? So if I do my traffic stop on that individual with no headlights, I don't have to read Miranda warnings during that encounter unless this individual is going to go to jail for something else, okay? Because that traffic stop is technically not considered custody. What is considered custody is a significant freedom of an individual's movement, like handcuffs, moving them to the car. Those types of things are considered this person is in custody. Okay, strip searches and body cavity searches is our next general police order. We don't really do a lot. Body cavity searches are really outside of our purview. They have to be done with a warrant in a medical facility, okay? With a warrant. So I've never personally seen or heard anybody ever doing one because the officer has to go get a warrant. They have to go to a medical facility. The medical facility has to be willing to do it, right? So I've personally never seen it or even heard of anybody doing it. But strip searches, I have seen. And the reason that it's important to understand them is because an officer, let's say we make our arrest on our individual with a burglary, okay? We're doing our custodial search. The officer feels something hard in the groin area of our individual, okay? To be able to retrieve that, technically per the Ohio Revised Code, would be a strip search, okay? Because per the Ohio Revised Code, any movement or removal of the undergarments is considered a strip search, okay? Now, we're not saying officers can't do that. All we're saying is there is an established policy in place. They have to call a supervisor to the scene, as long as all things being equal, right? There's no immediate threat to the officer's safety. All things being equal, they have to call a supervisor to the scene. Supervisor has a specific form that they fill out, sign it, and then they are permitted to retrieve that object, okay? Again, if this individual is going to jail, we can't allow them in a jail facility with something that we don't know on their person, right? It could be a firearm, it could be a knife, it could be nothing. It could be a cell phone, we don't know. And then just the last one, and I'm not gonna go over it too hard. It's just the stop forms. We discussed it already. Anytime there's an investigatory stop in a public place, and that includes a traffic stop, officers are required to fill out a data collection form in our software called Brazos. Okay, there's a lot of reasons and a lot of things that we do with that information that is not even based on necessarily the stop itself. So first thing that we're going to do is make sure the stop is proper. The supervisor, the commander, everyone is going to make sure that stop is proper. But what we can also do is we can give that information to our data collection team at the JC, and we can track data. How many individuals are being stopped in a certain area? What's the reason? Is a lot of this being done by Officer A and Officer B is doing none? Those are you can really kind of parcel out a lot of information, right? So, and another one that we are starting to see is, let's say we have information on, let's say burglary in a certain area, 2nd District, Lower West Side. Just for whatever reason, there's a lot of burglaries in the area. We figure this out because we have a lot of stops on that information. So what we can do is we can actually tailor training to that. We can talk to officers about burglaries, about what to look for. We can talk to the citizens, the people in the community, about how to protect yourself. So there's a lot of information, not just the stop itself, but it's the officer's conduct, it's training, it's crime analysis information that we are getting from that data. And with that, I am done with my presentation. I'm going to just grab my drink really fast because I got a little bit of dry mouth, and then I'll take your questions.
We have Do we have questions? If so, raise your hand and let me make a list so we can, okay, we may just go down. We just do this. We'll start over here with you when he comes back through, and then we'll go around this way.
How many questions can we ask?
Let's start by asking one and give everybody a chance to ask one, and then we can come back around again for a second question.
So just real quick, I'm kind of the master of ceremonies today. So if we want to go over, cut a little something, I'm willing to do. Sergeant Cook isn't even here yet, and she's up after me. So if we have to go a little longer, whatever we have to do to make sure we get all the information we need.
Yeah, that would be great. If that speaker is not here, then you can jump to whatever the next one would be, and we can always come back.
Sure.
Okay, so Commissioner Zaid, yes.
No, that's not our building. You see the strobes. I don't know what that.
Okay, because we have one. I'm trying to think. I have a few questions.
Okay.
But I'll stop because this one is something that I've been dealing with on my street. I'm a community organizer.
Okay.
I live on a street that's experienced a lot of crime and things right now. And I know a lot of my neighbors, they tend to report things anonymously.
Okay.
So when officers do come out, like as you said, not much can be done.
Mm-hmm.
Never knew that the reason was because of maybe it being an anonymous tip.
Mhm.
So if residents wanted to see more happen or
Okay.
wanted the officer to be able to go in a little deeper, would you recommend that they leave their name and their number? And if so, are they protected in any type of way from criminals or people there?
Okay. It's a great question.
They're submitting that about from knowing who they are.
So that's a great question. So I'll say a couple things. So the anonymous tip requirement really only stops an officer from stopping an individual based on that anonymous tip, right? But let's say members of the community are making anonymous tips saying, hey, there's juveniles, hangs out at this vacant home at all hours of the night. The officers can use that information, right? They can go to that area at those hours prescribed in let's say, a special attention form, right? They can go there. And hanging out at a vacant home is a crime. So officers can initiate a stop on those individuals. But here's where it gets a little gray. They're basing that stop on them seeing a crime being committed, not based on the anonymous tip. Okay. So what I would say is if individuals, sometimes we hear, individuals don't want to talk to the police because they don't want neighbors to see, right? So what I guess I would say is when they call, say, my name is Miss Johnson. I live at such and such. I don't want the police to come to my house, but this is the information I have for you, right? So that we can always call Miss Johnson and say, hey, you saw this person, we have him in custody, can you tell me a little bit more about him, right? But the officers will know not to go to her house so that she doesn't receive any unwanted, treatment or anything like that based on the neighbors.
Because I think the fear is they think that the officer will go to the person and say, yeah, Miss Johnson called
No.
and said, blah, blah, blah. Okay,
No.
all right.
No. So generally we will say neighbor. Hey, one of your neighbors called. Okay. But we wouldn't say Miss Johnson said such and such thing. Now we would know that information, and the most important thing is that we can establish what they call the veracity of the call. So I can call Miss Johnson. I know it's an actual real person. It's really, if you think about it, it's to prevent people from being stopped based on nothing, right? So let's say person A gets into a fight with person B, and just to mess with person A, person B says, hey, that person is dealing drugs, and it's not a mistake. Well, if an officer went there and stopped that individual and searched him and did all those types of things, based on anonymous tip, that the whole thing is untrue, right? Or could be untrue. So that's why we like to at least establish this person said these things. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
I think we're going down, ma'am.
Yeah.
Unless you have something to add to that.
Yeah, it was just a little follow-up.
Okay.
But if a person calls and leaves their name,
Mm-hmm.
that's a reported call. So could that ever be brought out? Like if the crime's committed, goes to court and everything, could it ever be like brought out where that person's identity has been disclosed?
It could be in court. It could be in
Because it's
court.
reported.
Yes, and I don't want to talk out of school, but I would imagine there's something that the individual can do and say, hey, I don't want, maybe redact it, or something. Like I said, I don't want to talk out of school, but I would imagine if you want that information to be presented, police officers and prosecutors and the judge is going to work with you to try to prevent that from occurring, right?
Protect your anonymity if you don't want.
Exactly. And I can't speak out of school because there may come a time where this information has to be out. But I'm sure they're more than willing to work with anybody who has contacted the police but don't want any of their information out. Okay?
All right, so just a point of clarification on the Supreme Court. I thought that the Supreme Court worked the opposite of what was stated. Like I think the Supreme Court makes a decision and you can broaden the rights, but you can't restrict them, right?
No.
It's not. It doesn't work that
It's
way.
like an upside down pyramid. So the Supreme Court creates like a broad category, and then the state creates a narrow category, and the municipality.
But if like on something like abortion or something, the Supreme Court says that it's allowed, you can't come in.
It's not
and-
rights. He's talking about restrictions.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I just
Yeah,
wanted to.
you can't, you can make a more specific policy, but you can't create a more, you can't restrict people's rights.
Okay, I was confused on that point.
Just real quickly, so let's take Terry versus Ohio. Terry versus Ohio is kind of the number one piece of case law that police officers have to know. Because Terry versus Ohio is the one who the case law that states an officer can stop an individual if they believe that they've committed, are committing, or have committed a crime. Okay? Only detention though, right? So that's what the Supreme Court says. That can't come to the city, and then the city says, no, we're just going to allow officers to stop them for whatever reason. That's
Yeah, my right. I'm sorry, you're right. It's early. Okay, so that was to clarify that. My question is, when you talked about consensual encounters,
yes, sir.
my question is, so what are off? Because this has happened to me before. What are officers trained to do with the consensual encounter when the person just flat out refuses to speak or cooperate with police? Because I've had that happen to me, and they've never been like, we're going to respect what you're saying. Like what are you trained to do in those situations? I know what I've experienced in those situations.
Sure, I can't speak to your experience because I have to say I wasn't there. But what we train, and I'll tell you specifically the scenario that we built. Okay, the scenario that we built was a store owner does not want an individual who's hanging on the sidewalk to be in front of their store anymore. Okay, so they call the police. Hey, this person is hanging out. This is a scenario that every one of our officers have been through. In that scenario, we have specific checks and specific things that the officer is permitted and is not permitted to do. Built into the scenario, eventually the person says, I don't want to talk to you anymore and I'm leaving. And they're there to leave. Now, if an officer stops them in any way, coerces them in any way, it's a failure. Okay? So what we train officers are the person, a reasonable person has to believe that they're free to leave at any point or terminate the encounter at any point. Okay? So that's what we train. I'm not exactly sure exactly what occurred, but it's very clear. And one thing that I really harp on is not inadvertently converting that consensual encounter into a seizure. Okay, so if for whatever reason you felt you were not free to leave, if I'm standing over here and there's two officers around me and I start to feel like I'm not free to leave, even if the officers are saying you're free to leave, you've still converted that consensual encounter into a seizure. Okay. Now, not to jump around, I know I didn't specifically answer your question, and I apologize for that, but even the sirens on the vehicle, even the presence of your uniform can inadvertently trigger a seizure, okay? So we really harp on our officers to ensure the individual we're talking to understands that they're free to leave. Now, is an officer going to say over and over, hey, you're free to leave, free to leave? No, because really what a consensual encounter is, it's just a conversation, right? And we wouldn't do that in just a general conversation.
Another question or a follow-up?
A follow-up. I'm just trying to get to, like, we know there are power dynamics at play.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're on the one hand saying you know that they're free to leave. I mean, like, I know for me, I always try to respect the police. Like, I don't want it to get like hostile.
Sure.
So I always try to comply,
Mhm.
but also make sure that my rights aren't being violated.
Sure.
I'm just not understanding. I guess I'm just basing this on my experiences.
Yeah,
I never feel free to leave,
yeah.
and so
Are you referring to a situation where there's a vehicle involved?
yeah, and honestly, like
Well-
it wasn't like there was like anything, and
Sure.
they didn't see anything, but even though like I made it very clear
Mm-hmm.
that I'm ready to go, and and I'm asked them if they're detaining me for anything.
Mhm.
They never tell me that I'm free to go. So you're saying this,
Mm-hmm.
but through multiple encounters
Yeah.
with the police. So that's why I'm asking, what are they trained to do when people are making it clear that they do not want to talk to the police
Okay.
because now it doesn't feel consensual,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So I'm like, I hear what you're saying,
Yeah.
and I hear the language that you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
but the reality of how these things are panning out, like if you're someone like me, like a black man,
Mm-hmm.
and I definitely don't want anything escalating with the police,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm trying to cooperate with them,
Sure.
but they're violating my rights. And I even feel like by saying you're violating my rights, I could escalate the police.
Okay.
So that's why I'm trying to get at this
Sure.
training portion, because I hear what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I think that the reality of how these things are playing out, because we all understand the power dynamics
Mm-hmm.
between a police and a civilian.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of what I'm trying to get at. Like
I
I'm trying
understand.
to get at like the nuts and bolts of like when you're training police
Mm-hmm.
and you're doing the consensual encounter training,
Mm-hmm.
are police being told if someone says they don't want to talk to you, you do not have anything that allows you to reasonably detain
Yes.
these people? Why are we not training the police to say, just so to be clear, you are free to
Yeah.
leave? Like, why won't the police say that
Well,
to people?
so-
Because unless the police say it, I'm not going to feel free to leave.
Sure. Sure. So I can't speak to every kind of side that you're referring to, but what I will say is a couple things. That line is specifically written in curriculum, right? If an individual says, "Am I free to leave?" they're to say, "Yes, you are free to leave." Now, mind you, if they are, right? Because I don't know what's in the mind of the police officer. I don't know why they're there. I don't know what dispatch has said. I don't know any of those details, right? In a traffic stop situation, you are not free to leave until the officer finishes whatever I'm trying to remember the term, whatever police function that they have, right? So let's say I stop you for a traffic stop. I write my citation. I ask you to sign it, and you're then free to leave. You can do it. But until I can finish my police function, you're not free to leave. You're being detained in connection with that traffic stop. Okay. Specifically, we have said that you have no lawful authority at this point. You are to terminate the encounter. Okay. The reason that I can't say, hey, you're free to leave, and those types of things. One, that's not very. If I'm having a conversation with you, and it's just a conversation. I don't want to just keep telling you you're free to leave, right? It's kind of a weird thing to have in a conversation, right? So that's why we train officers that this person has to feel that they're free to leave, okay? And you mentioned before, you asked, am I being detained, and they won't tell you, right?
They say no,
Oh, they say no.
but I still don't feel free to leave.
Okay.
What about a vehicle search?
But yeah, I think because you're in the car and they're probably not finished with their.
Yeah, I know. I don't like, even with officers, when officers bring me information, unless I can get a really why were they there? What were they told? Did they maybe at first have some type of reasonable suspicion to talk to you, but then after that, their any feelings that they had were dispelled? At that point, you were free. You know what I mean? So it can really get, and I don't mean at all to discount anything that you're saying. All I am conveying is, unless I had all the information and watched the video and those types of things, then I would be able to make a better judgment. What I will say is, remember, all police interactions are captured on body cam. Okay, and officers are trained. You will get this in the afternoon, I think. Officers are trained, if a civilian wishes to make a complaint without any other interaction, they are to give you a complaint form to fill out. And there's different things you can do. You can give it back to them, you can take it in, you can call. There's all kinds of different avenues, right? As soon as that complaint comes in, then we can start looking at it, right? And just like our data collection, we can look at that wearable camera system and say, this person was free to go. You should not have done this. And if it's an issue we continue to see, we can build training off, hey, I don't know if our officers are fully understanding this concept.
Yeah, I think that's important. And as some of our remote viewers and listeners may be listening to you, they may have shared similar experiences. So what I believe and hope is that you, as a trainer, would take a concern like this back to officers as you train them.
Sure.
And let them know that this is a real concern, even from a member of the police commission.
Sure.
You know, and hopefully that can help along with the information that you have shared about the body cameras and all of that. But I think we do see different scenarios, traffic stop, you know, versus, another kind of stop. And so I think what we need to do as commissioners is to make sure that we understand the parameters that surround each kind of encounter, a stop, you know, because they do appear to be different in terms of what can be done or not done. But if you could reinforce that in your training, and say that this is a real concern, you know, of people. And I think Commissioner Adams' comment as a Black man lends even more weight, you know, to that kind of training. So thank you. Are you okay? I know it doesn't quite resolve the issue, but I think you've opened a door that will allow for more discussion. There you go. Yes. Yeah.
So one thing that I'll say is I'm on the Force Review Board. Have you had any training on the Force Review Board? So more or less, we analyze every level 2 or level 3 use of force, more or less. And the first thing I start with is, why were the officers there? When they got there, what did they see at that point? And then I just slowly start to work my way down a list. Okay, and then I can get I can put myself in the eyes of the officer to get an understanding of what they knew at the time, what they didn't know at the time, and make a fair assessment of the use of force. I know you'll be doing obviously a lot of other things, but I'm just speaking from my experience. Okay.
So it does seem, if I could synthesize this, that what the contradiction I see is that you're talking a lot about feelings, right? But that is requiring us to read each other's minds, read each other's subtleties of, you know, body language. I think what would help in Dr. Adams' scenario, and it's occurred to me, and we have to say, you know, there are different circumstances. It is a traffic stop or it's just like, you know, for a minor traffic violation. And I've had the experience that the officer approaches the situation in a very heightened mood, with a tone that would suggest anger or frustration. And that, because, you know, we're social creatures, that already puts me in a position that I would feel intimidated, you know, expressing myself freely. So would there be kind of emotional and socio training and communication training? Because I think all that's required is probably scenarios that are more relational. That could apply to every scenario, right? Because I mean, and also if it's a very potentially dangerous situation, I don't think it's good to even go in with, you know, a heightened, that would make something worse potentially. You know, so just that type of kind of psychological training would be, and applying those two realms, because it would be very difficult for people to read each other's minds or feelings. And lots of things could, unless they have had training on those things, they may misinterpret things.
So let me go back to our scenario with the individual who called and said, hey, there's somebody out front of my store and I want them gone. A lot of the things that you're discussing, we discussed in that training. We're not talking about mind readings and those types of things. What we're talking about would be what would a reasonable person believe that they were free to go? Reasonable person. And as you read out policies, what you're going to read is the officers even understand. I like that you brought that up because I didn't even understand their tone of voice can convert a consensual encounter into a seizure. Even their tone of voice, the way they're speaking. Okay, so we talk about all those things, the number of officers, the lights, all those things are factors that they have to consider. And it's possible that they didn't consider them. in that circumstance, right? That they, like I said before, is even if an officer tells you you're free to leave, if you have an individual backed up into a corner, would a reasonable person feel that they're free to leave? No. So we train officers. It's not about mind reading. It's about, would you feel free to leave? Would I feel free to leave? And if two officers had me in a corner, I'd tell you, no, I don't feel free to leave. This is why we really harp on consensual encounters are permitted, but to stop an individual, you have to be able to articulate the reason that you did it. Okay?
Follow up, are the officers given the opportunity to be the citizen and then another officer interacts with them? So they can understand how.
No, and no. What I will say is our role players are police officers, but our role players are we have very, very specific things that our role players have to do to get get either a response or a non-response from an officer. So I can't rotate them out because it's like, hey, when an officer says this, I need you to say this. When an officer does this, I need you to do this. You know what I mean? So our role players are police officers. We make sure they're dressed, in jeans and hats and, that type of thing. But to get to that specificity, it wouldn't be reasonable in the model that we're using right now. But I definitely understand what you're saying.
Yes,
Am I allowed?
please.
Oh, okay. I see the backup is there. Thank you again.
Would you identify yourself for us? I assume that you are with the Cleveland Police Department?
No.
No, you're not. You with the public.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is put you on hold for 1 minute so we can get around the table with the commissioners to make sure that their training is in place, and then we'll catch you at the end, if you're okay with that. All right, good, thank you. I remember you now. You have a suit on today. Yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Ryan. I really appreciate all the stories you tell about like the training, and it gives me a really good picture. So one thing that you talked about was, you gave the example a lot of a striped shirt and black pants.
Sure.
And humans are notoriously bad at remembering things.
Okay.
And also I'm imagining, we hear a lot of stories about you fit the description, right?
Okay.
And I'm imagining that a lot of calls that come in are not always as clear as descriptions that come in are not always as clear as striped shirt, black pants.
Okay.
Right, because if someone says, as we've seen a lot, if we hear black man in a hoodie, right, that could apply to a lot of people.
Sure.
And we see a lot of encounters where, right, if the description is that vague, and then, if that's the description and then someone's stopping somebody, that, they fit the description, but is there a certain threshold that descriptions have to reach in order for them to be, because they're not anonymous, so, the officer doesn't necessarily have to have other reasonable suspicion, but it's not anonymous, but their description is vague.
Okay.
What happens in those cases?
Okay, good question. So what I will say is a few things. So number one would be location. Okay. So let's talk about my house was broken into. I saw the person run out and he went north, just north, right? So we have officers in the area that are looking north. They see the prescribed person. I like the fact that you said it was not an anonymous tip, because what can we do if we have that information and we see that vague description that you gave me? What can we do? No, we can do a callback.
Oh, callback.
Radio, do a callback and ask the caller what color hoodie did this person have. See if there's any other specific information. What kind of hair did they have? Did they have glasses on? Were they tall? Were they short? Were they overweight? Were they very skinny? So those are the types of things we can do.
Is that typically what's happening?
Yeah. Now, what I will say is time and distance play a very important role, right? So my house was broken into an hour ago is going to be very different than my house was broken into a minute ago, and the person ran north, and let's say you were down the street doing something and you got there in 3 minutes. So we're talking 4 to 5 minutes. That person's probably reasonably still in that maybe north area, right? But we also don't want to restrict that either, right? Because what if the person goes north and turns around and comes back south? So there's no specific guideline. What we teach officers is you have to be reasonable. You have to be reasonable, okay? So if I would say in your description, I would not feel comfortable stopping that individual with some type of other type of information. Were they in the location that the caller told me they were going to be in, or in the just general area, right? Do a callback, get a color of a hoodie. Did the person leave anything? That type of information I need to know.
Yes, I think I opened a door that I probably should not have opened with follow-up questions and let people follow-up questions be their question, because other than that, we aren't gonna get around this table, but please go ahead. I've opened that door, so go ahead.
So on that scenario that you just gave.
Yeah.
You said that, you would not be comfortable
Yes.
with stopping that person.
Yes.
Is that against department policy to not stop that person?
So remember, the policy on that, unfortunately, cannot be overly specific, right? And here's why I say that. So let's say my personal house gets broken into, right? And I see the person run. They ran and they have a hoodie on. And they went that way. And I say, okay, the person went north and the officer goes north. They don't see him. Then they go south and they see something like, ooh, we have to be able to give the officers at least a tool, right? Because I don't want to, my house was broken into, I'm the victim, right? And I also have a right and a responsibility as an officer to serve that victim as well. So we can't put those types of specific things on there, because the officer has to be able to independently make decisions and work in an environment that's changing so fast. Okay?
Commissioner Van Leer?
Thanks. So my initial question was asked by Commissioner Adams, but it just, for me, seems like a basic contradiction between a consensual encounter and being able to investigatory stop. But we already went there, so I'm not going to do it. My other question is, you mentioned if someone's doing a pat-down, an officer's doing a pat-down search, and they feel what could be a weapon.
Yes.
Given concealed carry law now in
Yeah.
Ohio,
Sure.
starting this month, right?
Sure.
How does that change what you're going to do?
Great question. We actually had pretty extensive training on that topic. So I once again, I don't want to speak out of school, but if you were a concealed carry holder, you still have a responsibility to tell the police officer. Okay. So I should not be discovering, I would hope to not discover a weapon. And if I did, I would then say, either are you a concealed carry holder, or there's very kind of specific rules that you have to have when you interact with the police, unless I'm incorrect about that. Go ahead.
It just seems like, it's permitless concealed carry at this point. And so at what point does the person with the weapon, is that obligation kick in, right?
As soon as they have, I don't know the line, but as soon as they have some type of meaningful interaction with the police. So it wouldn't be like a conversation, but if I'm stopping an individual based on some type of information or a traffic stop or something, that person has an obligation to tell me.
So we make sure that we.
Okay, to the chair, when I took my concealed carry class, I was told that anytime I have an interaction with a police officer, I must let them know that I'm carrying.
And
my hands should be on the steering wheel and let them know, officer, I have a weapon in the car. Here's my permit.
Here's the honest truth that a lot of people don't know. Because the rules have changed so rapidly, it's kind of hard for me to gauge it. But in my experience, anybody who has ever had a concealed carry license has been more than cooperative with the police. Well, I know you don't. I'm saying in my just past experiences. Anytime anybody, they've always said, remember, I carry off duty. So when I get pulled over, the first thing I say is, I'm an off-duty police officer. I have my weapon. It's in this location. Same thing. Okay? Did that kind of answer your question? I'm going to be honest with you. I wish I knew the new specific information a little bit more to give you a better understanding. What I will say is, you still have an obligation to inform the police officer. Okay?
you can tell that we have a lot of questions. We are a few minutes away from the break. So we're going to extend this at least by another 5 or 7 minutes to see if we can get everybody's questions in and also recognize our public people who want to participate as well. So, yes.
Just a quick follow-up question about the permitless carry and kind of search and seizure. So how does that, I guess, because we are pretty much in the month where it goes into effect, how does that intersect with if there's probable cause when an officer is stopping? Because we're now, you don't have to have a permit to have a weapon.
Sure.
So if the officer, like you said, only can pat you down on the outer of your clothes.
Sure.
But if they feel something that is a weapon, they can then go in your pocket.
Mhm.
But now you have a right to have the gun anyway. So
Well,
does
you
that
do.
change anything?
Well, you do have a right to have the gun, right? But you also have a responsibility to, not a responsibility, a legal responsibility to inform the police officer that you have that gun. Okay? So now,
Is that in legislation though? Like,
once again, like I said to him, the things have been changing so rapidly, it's kind of hard to get my finger on it. And I wish I would have kind of dug into that a little bit deeper. But you have the, even if you have a firearm, no license or anything, and we are interacting in a meaningful way, you still have to tell me that. Okay? You're still obligated to let me know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I would hope that if it got to the level of pat down, I would already know that information.
okay.
You know?
I guess I'm just worried if people, because the laws, like you said, change
Sure.
fast, if that's not in legislation, a person just might not know.
Sure.
Because if they've never had a permit before, they've
True.
never taken a class before. Like if you've taken a class and now the license is just lapsed and you're like, oh, I don't have to go back. Like
Sure.
you already have that knowledge, but now you don't have
Right.
just about a gun.
Yeah.
How would you know that you're supposed to disclose?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I don't really have an answer to that. I would hope that they would do some type of community education. The state would be doing that, saying like you still need to tell police officers. But I can't necessarily speak to that.
Okay, just for clarification, for our viewers and listeners, you used the term legal responsibility.
Mhm.
So is there a legal responsibility? I just want to make sure our at-home viewers understand this. So without, now that you are.
Let me do this. Let me look at the ORC on break, and I will make a specific.
Thank you.
No problem.
We appreciate that.
Because I don't want to say something incorrect. At least let me kind of look into it.
Yeah, we appreciate that because I think what is happening, we are getting clarification on lots of laws and policies, but we also need to make sure that our public understand as well. So yeah, thank you.
No
We
problem.
appreciate that. Commissioner Chura,
No question.
no question. I was going to say, you better not have any
How about a comment? Just sometimes when when officers get somebody and it might be a vague black shorts and stripe, you might not know what color the stripes are, but we might engage somebody and stop and ask them some questions, and maybe somebody else gets the guy or more information comes out. A lot of times we'll take right over radio and say, hey, radio, what's the description of that male? And then they could hear it, and they have the reason why we're stopping. We're not just stopping them out of the blue. And then they're pretty much happy with that. We apologize for taking their time and we go about our business. So.
Good comment. Good job. Thank you. Commissioner Wong.
I just had a follow-up to Commissioner Van Leer's question and another small question. So we know of a very famous case that kind of synthesizes also what Commissioner Benito said. In the case of Philando Castillo, it was a traffic stop.
Mm-hmm.
He had just come from the grocery store with his girlfriend. He gave his ID, and then he very calmly told the police officer, this is all based on the dash cam, body cam, I do have a firearm on me. The police officer was acquitted of that shooting with the reasoning that he feared, I guess, that the two of them matched the description of two people that had just robbed committed a robbery.
Okay.
The only description given, he said that he didn't see his girlfriend Diamond very well, but the description given from Philando Castile was solely that he had a wide set nose, which is, I would say, typical of
You said white?
wide set nose.
Oh, I thought
Wide
you
set.
said,
I
okay.
mean, so this
okay.
could be typical of people of African American descent. So I guess my question is, and this led to like a shooting in front of a child in a car.
Mm-hmm.
He did everything correct.
Mm-hmm.
He lost his life, and then a jury acquitted them because, according to them, they felt that, and it was a Native American officer. It's a very complicated situation. It was not like, from what I saw from the video, there was emotion from the officer. So he may have felt fear. He may have believed all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, in that moment, I don't think the feeling should have been there should have been something that says, wide said no, kind of vague, right?
Okay.
You know, the logic must kick in. But we've already biased this officer into thinking that these two people were assailants, and that made him go down this rabbit hole. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. And then it led to a deadly encounter, right? So that's my concern, is that when does the citizen get to say, well, I did this because I feared the situation? Because the officer can always say, well, I did this because I feared the situation.
Okay.
And how do you, from your perspective, how knowing that happened in real life, not in a scenario that was, in virtual reality, how would you train your officers for a situation? Because I know the traffic stops are very high, octane events. There could be warrants, and then, I just think it's unreasonable. I do have a firearm. That seems also logically like that this might not be the person. He's trying to tell you he has a firearm. If it was really a situation that he intended to harm the officer. So, that's a real life situation. And I would, maybe a real life situation would also can be used in a scenario, because this has happened. And the second question is,
I'm sorry, ma'am, what was your first question?
that's the question, like, in light of this
Yes.
happening in real life,
Mhm.
why do we need, this shows what happens in real life. The scenario cannot fully encapsulate exactly, right? When we plan a scenario, reality is always going to give us something much more that we don't see.
Mm-hmm.
So can something like this be used in a scenario?
Absolutely.
To training?
Sure.
And what would you convey to your officers are the salient things that this officer missed
Okay.
in that scenario?
Okay.
And the addendum question is, can we, so I'm assuming the training committee will have some ability to improve the training, and can we see the training? Like, can we?
I don't see why not, but I can't, I don't see why you couldn't, right? I don't know all the kind of workings of things, goings on, but I don't see why you couldn't. I think it would only benefit you. I know the CPC has came down in the past and seen training. OPS comes down sometimes. City law comes down. There's no reason why you shouldn't or couldn't.
Right.
But let me just briefly get to that first question, and I'm going to give you a non-answer answer. Okay. So just like we discussed a little earlier, I need to see more information, right, on the specifics of what occurred. Not only do I want to see the video, I want to read the case notes. I want to read the dispatch notes. I want to read absolutely everything before I can make it. And I'm going to view this just like I would our officers' use of force. I can't just watch the video. Okay. I need to see exactly what they knew prior to, what they didn't know, what the individual knew, didn't know. I need to see the entire big picture before I can reasonably make a determination that something is correct or not correct. Okay.
Right, but what I'm getting at is that this is a scenario that happened in real life with all of the complexity of real life, right?
Sure.
I'm asking if the scenarios that you test are simpler than this, because life is not simple. Right?
I completely understand and agree. So what I mentioned it earlier, that we are integrating all of our reality-based training to encompass a whole myriad of policies, including procedural justice, hearing and listening, giving the person a voice, being transparent, including search and seizure, use of force, all these different things. That's specific. Remember, we are bound by certain things, right? We can't, if I use some type of simunition in an environment, officers have to have masks, they have to have goggles. So there's a lot, excuse me, there's a lot of there are certainly constraints. I can't have officers fighting a role player, like real life fighting, because people get hurt. What I can do is I can isolate those areas and I can have them train in subject control here. I can have them train in this area here, here, and here, and we can kind of bring those things together. But like some type of full-on interaction where we're fighting and shooting and all that stuff, sometimes we're bound just by the reality of injuries and people getting hurt and the environment in which, the physical environment where we can't use simunition in this area because of something else occurring. If that makes sense.
Let me mention a couple of things. I think today's session provides rich, fertile ground for the various police committees to look at and bring these topics to their committees and look at whether policy, we have suggestions for policy changes or additions, or even in terms of training, what we can offer. So we want to make sure that in order to get through this day with the most information possible, that we ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's ask questions and not a lot of scenarios. Let's ask the questions. We still have 2 more people over here on the commission that we want to get through. And what's happening is that we probably would not have the opportunity to go around for a second set of questions, but I will ask a question of the commission before we end this session. I see our next speaker is here. So, Commissioner.
I don't mean to cut you off, ma'am. Also, if we have time, we can cut a break short. We can do a little bit at the end, whatever it takes to answer the questions. I have no, I'm not shy about answering questions.
Yeah,
So
I think we want to just make sure that we definitely want to recognize your need for a break, but I also want to recognize the need for a break for these people as well. So we'll try to balance that out. But I appreciate that you'll be willing to do that in order to make sure all the questions are answered. So, Commissioner Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. On the permitless carry issue, just want to level set for anyone. Anyone in the state can buy a gun at like a Walmart. Anyone in the state can carry said Walmart gun on their person in a concealed carry fashion. There's been no effort on the state's part to educate the public to keep them safe in the scenario that you're describing, Lieutenant. So the onus is on the police department. Now the onus is on the CPC to keep the public safe, to keep officers safe.
Yes.
And this is a really dangerous situation that we really need to be aware of.
And I do apologize for speaking a little bit past my skis. I need to really see if it says specifically in there that they have to tell. It does not.
No, we just put it.
Okay.
So on the Ohio Attorney General website, high revised code, all of that. As of 2022, concealed carriers no longer are required to promptly inform the officer that they are carrying a handgun, a concealed weapon.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to dig into that too, and I'll see if there's anything else in there that maybe it will help me clarify in the future.
I think what we've clarified here is that the state has done absolutely nothing to protect officers and civilians in these encounters, and this is just not a priority for them. So this is bad. This is a bad situation that we need to talk about more. Yeah. My question is, why would a civilian consent to a search during a traffic stop, and what would happen if they do not consent to a search in a traffic stop?
Good question. I can't. So why a person would consent to a traffic stop? That's going to be based on the individual. Okay. Maybe they don't have anything they want to hide. They say, okay, you can do. For me, to consent to a search when I just want to get on my way is a little bit. I'm trying to get home. Or I'm trying to get where I want to get to. So that's a very individually specific on why they would. Your second question was what?
What would happen? So if an officer pulls me over,
Mhm.
they say,
Hey, I want to search your vehicle.
Mhm.
I say,
nothing,
Mhm.
no, sir, no, thank you. What would happen after that point?
Sure. Okay, so if the officer doesn't have any type of, any other reasonable suspicion for any other law enforcement function, you're free to leave, period. Now, it's possible that the officer does have something, right? It's possible that they are, and this is, we discuss scope a lot, and scope is very, very important on traffic stops, because you can only stop a vehicle for as long as it takes you to complete whatever, why ever you stop that vehicle, you can only hold that vehicle for as long as you are investigating your matter. As soon as you're dispelled or confirmed, you have to make a decision, okay? So like a canine, right? If I make a traffic stop on an individual because they don't have any headlights, I cannot hold that vehicle to wait for a canine. What I can do is write my ticket, and if the canine happens to get there while I'm writing it, fine. But I can't hold that vehicle there for 45 minutes because I want to wait for a canine to come.
So do you need to consent for the canine or
No.
Because it's outside the vehicle?
Yes.
Got it, okay.
But I can't hold you for the sake of holding you.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
No, we actually specifically train that they are, and I believe there's 2 cases that have come out where it's been shown on body cameras that officers are kind of, lollygagging or whatever, and both times the officers got in a lot of trouble for that. So we actually specifically train that you cannot, K, E. So no, you write your ticket and dispel your information or confirm it. Okay, that answer your question? Okay.
Commissioner Reed.
I sat in the wrong seat.
No.
I forgot my original question, but I
Sorry,
did want to.
next time we'll start on this side. and you go around.
I did want to ask this though. Following up on Commissioner Kennedy, how many times is a person asked to consent to a search before it's considered coercion? Because you gave a scenario earlier where they asked for like 3 times and they finally consented. If you ask me once and I say no, the second time it's coercion to me.
Okay.
I'm just asking, like, is there?
There's no specific guideline that says 2, just like anything else, right? We're rapidly evolving. We are communicating just as individuals. So it doesn't say on a piece of paper that at 3 times, right? It could be 1 time. It could be 1 time. Is sir, can I search your vehicle different than can I search your vehicle? Right. It could be 1 time. So no, is there anything written on a piece of paper? No, but that's why we train our officers to make sure and give them an understanding of the way they are doing things may convert these encounters into different landscapes. Okay?
Okay, so we finally made it around the table. I just want to repeat again that this is an opportunity for our committees to take notes about some work that they can do, either in policy or with training, that can make a difference based on what we have heard today, questions that we still are not quite sure we got the answer we needed. This is an opportunity for us to follow up through our committee meetings. So let me ask this one question before before I open it up to 2 questions from the public. Is there a question that is super important that we need to go back to a commissioner to raise before we end this session? I know that we said we would go around again if you had second questions, but I had no idea. Well, I should have had an idea. I know this commission that we were going to be, engaged. So, is there a question that we need to raise that's super important as a second question for someone before we open it to the public? We're okay then. All right. I see smiles and a few smirks. So, okay. So thank you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for listening and for raising questions that will help us to do our job better and to let the community know about things that they can do as well to protect themselves and, as they come in contact on the street. There are things we need to know, and there are things the community also needs to know. So thank you. Sir? So we're gonna ask that there are questions and not, a narrative. So come, please.
Need the mic.
You need a mic? Yes.
All right, thank you again for coming out. Well, I apologize for breaking one rule. This is about a follow-up to an anonymous tip. Would this give the police the key to an enactment? So I'm asking if I'm driving. We have a large driving thing going on in our city with violations. And if someone's driving recklessly, running lights, and I take down a license plate number and I give a call and give my name, my make and model, could something be done? Just for say you may just come to their home like, hey, yeah, we got you on camera. We need you to, and it doesn't go further. Just a possibility scenario. And opposed to search and seizure, an alternative. Like, could it be like some type of assertive cordialness that's like being taught? Because like in scenarios like these gas stations, our community is using these gas stations and they openly using drugs and creating a bad environment where they're drinking and smoking, and people can't even pump the gas in my community without feeling threatened right now. And the police are not doing certain things. And I hope that you can take into account that something could be done to, like assertive cordialness to kind of go in and lightweight investigate.
Thank you. Let me ask.
Cordialness, we love that.
We love that expression.
Thank you.
Let me answer your first question. So on the anonymous tip, so what we tell officers to do is you can't base your stop solely on that information. But what can you do? You can go to the area, right? If you see that vehicle and they make a traffic infraction, you can make a traffic stop based on that information that you're receiving, okay? So it's not inaction, but we also want to protect just, citizen A that has done nothing wrong. Then people are calling saying that individual's doing something and then they're getting searched and stopped, and we don't want that either. So there's a balancing act. All we say is you can't base your stop solely on that tip. But you can go to the area, investigate further, and do that gather more information. Okay. Sometimes just zone cars in the area will the erratic driving sometimes will kind of calm based on my experience. Just having zone cars in the area. Okay. The second question, I like the assertive cordialness. I like it. What we teach is a professional demeanor and a normal tone of voice. Professional demeanor, normal tone of voice. Okay.
I was gonna ask, do they just take customer service classes?
So no. Not specifically. So we do have communication classes in the academy. We have public speaking classes. We have that type of thing. So one of the things that we do with our recruits is once we get them in uniform throughout the academy process, they'll be in a white shirt, button up, and then eventually they'll be in the blues, and then eventually they'll get their patches. That's kind of how our academy goes. So once they're in the blue uniforms with no patches is kind of our stage 2. It's where we want them to present themselves, speak clearly, concisely, those types of things. We'll teach is professional demeanor and a normal tone of voice. Okay. I usually have a much worse tone of voice because I have to yell to the back. I normally don't have a microphone, but presenting yourself, standing confidently, that type of thing.
Okay, so the very last question from the public, Lou.
Excuse me?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Sure, we try to avoid scenarios, but the real life is everything all the commissioner mentioned together. My true experience is even I may not be the target, but maybe the people at companies have been targeted. Officer may show up with a very harsh tone of voice, and the choice of words are definitely not being considered polite, respectful, friendly. Sure, we understand police officers, they have been trained to have a confidence because they have to be authority to a certain degree to handle a very dangerous situation. But it doesn't matter it's a traffic stop or as a pedestrian being stopped. Lots of time, people feel unsafe. They don't feel they are free to leave because when officer first asked the question, it was totally not friendly, not cordial to begin with. One particular scenario, I was accompanying this female friend. She has a bigger purse. No, that's a fashion thing. I'm not sure if we teach that in the police academy, but there was no probable cause for search. She had a scarf laying over the bag, her, kind of designer bag, and this and that. The officer actually asked to see what were in the bags. Now, at this moment, we all know, based on our true rights, we can say no. Should we say even more than once? That's already overreached. However, people in general feel if I say no, I will be in bigger trouble. So I think the total training procedures and the policy has to work together to improve that. For example, today, you may not use that kind of tone of voice because you know you are coming to the commission to do training. So you definitely automatically, your mentality is different. But when you are on the street, you always anticipate dangers. Danger even for the public.
I'm sorry.
So
you have a question?
please answer this question. How possible it is for the current police already out of academy to have a continuous training to really talk like they are still a civilian to talk to another civilian, not to use a police attitude immediately?
Sir. Thank you. Okay, so I'll just discuss two things. So the kind of, I think your first question is how much when an individual police officer gets out of the academy, they get trained, they come back every year for three sessions of training, usually 3 days each. So they're constantly being kind of trained and updated. That does not include any e-learning assignments they might have, which I know that wouldn't necessarily assist with this, but let's just say in general, they're gonna do three in-person sessions per year. It's usually about between 7 and 9 days of training throughout the year, which certainly we would love more, but the reality is we have to work and we have certain schedules and that type of thing. The second question, I don't want to speak to it too much because you're going to get a big block of it this afternoon, is accountability. Okay, so we have wearable camera systems, and we have OPS, we have even our district supervisors, and there are avenues if you have a complaint that you can file a complaint on that police officer. And luckily, with the wearable camera systems, we can go back in there, we can look, and we can see what's occurring. Okay, a lot of times what we get is a retraining. Okay, so I don't want to speak to any situation that you may have, but let's say an officer did come in and I think you said already coming and being harsh, right? We can look at that and we can look at that specific officer and we can design a retraining for that specific officer. Okay, so let's say you file a complaint, it eventually gets down to my level in the training section. I would say, okay, what are issues that I'm seeing here? And I would try to understand if this is an officer issue or if this is a division issue. If it's an officer issue, we're going to retrain that officer. If it's something that we're repeatedly seeing, then it might be a division issue where we're really going to focus on it during in-person training. Does that make sense?
Okay, so I think we're finished with this with this session. Something may spark another question during a break or another session, but let's take a quick 10-minute break. If you get back a little bit earlier, we'll get started. We're probably about 15 or 20 minutes past where we need to be, but let's do that now. Thank you.
Break time. You like that? That's the break window.
The last police training. Yeah.
I can't print all that stuff. Like and have it to immediately. It's a lot. So you want all of the. Just the one. This one.
Yeah.
Because there's one for everyone coming up. So I can print them all, but I'll give them to you at the end. Like, because it's gonna be.
Oh, never mind.
Yes. Either day.
Okay. Either way, somebody's
Yeah, either. So, and exactly, so everybody is going to follow. You always say, oh, watch them, but it's like, you can give on the spot info, you know, if you do that. But rather than go over here to a thing, so I guess over here, and then when it's all said and done, we don't want to, how do you already, how do
I did, but I have.
I know, I never did ask my question. I never did ask my, but maybe that's why.
That's why I was just like,
Self-awareness, John, self-awareness, that's why.
you want to
Everything was in the Bible.
I was like,
I never did ask my question. I wanted to ask about when a visa is searched or the inventory is.
that was my seed. It wasn't.
Because I was
That was my
so was that inventory was done, they say it's in jail or whatever.
I'm gonna ask her,
Does the owner sign on
if I miss anything, just jump in.
Go down the counter. That's what they do. Go down the counter. I know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure probably the next 30 minutes they're probably crawling around. Is your first day? Oh, that's awesome. And you can
So you said your role right now is zero?
Right now, I'm in charge of personnel section. I'm in charge of hiring down. I did the best time my title section. Okay. So what we do in that case, generally, and then we
and I just think that
All right, should be good to go.
Then they take back at the end and that's so the issue is.
I'm finished today.
In fact,
I just want to go to the rest of the
let me just talk to you. Because you're paying first, and then they take time.
So he wakes up and starts crawling all around here because he thinks he's trying. No, that's what. No, that's the problem.
I was like,
Okay, it's your time, boys.
So yeah, we're trying to balance it. So you don't want to
Yeah, and I probably get, no, we need to, we need to look at it, and I try to say that as a question. And my goal is to train for the position first. You know, but I will check with the officer and see, because we've had them first. I want to look at the concerns that you really mentioned. And I know I want, right here, but then I heard the discussion, because I watched that all this. And the thing about it, though, isn't just, wasn't just that. I heard Stephanie House, she's been from the well, it wasn't just her comment about civil rights. Civil rights is very frustrating. I mean, they know, yeah, but the thing is, they should have already Serena's just asking a question first. Like it's coming on but here's what the follow-up to some of that you know, that's the thing. I don't know. I'm just going to ask the position first and give them the choice. You know, yeah, just ask them.
I do think in public, regular. I think the only thing is that sometimes our ushers in the public are like, how does this which is not an issue. So I think that if those questions get out,
let me tell you another thing. Right. They should not be asking questions to be answered from the trainer. There's a public comment. So we gave them the opportunity to ask the question. That's the only difference. Public comments, whether it's city council, wherever it is, you don't even respond to their comments. You take it in, to go back and talk about it. Yeah. If I ask, I don't know what the gentleman about, I didn't recognize him. He's been most of my meetings. But he had someone today and I didn't recognize him. And he was talking to Lieutenant Ryan, who came in, so I thought maybe he was going to be. So I just asked him if he comes back. I think Luke is going to make a difference. You know, and I think it's a matter of what's going on and make a comment on this. Yeah. But let me ask, I asked, and I have no problem with
Use of force is like 10:30 on one of those sheets. The next day.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
If you want to go with Tom. I really like your comment about like, we don't have to tackle this stuff right now. We don't need to be making recommendations right now. This is about learning so that then we can go into the community and do that work.
I think it's fertile ground for committee work. I think it's a great. I know. We have these.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So you're gonna try to stop farms?
Yes, stop farms is the only one I have today.
Oh, okay.
It kind of goes hand in
Okay, I
hand.
see. Yes, that's.
Lieutenant Smith, yeah.
Okay.
That's Lieutenant Ryan.
Okay.
Maybe.
You don't wanna take on this. I'm joking.
Yeah, it's not mine. That's not mine. It's not my real house.
If we're done, we can reconvene.
This kind of goes hand in hand with certain.
Excuse me, everyone. Anybody driving a Buick? Or four-door brown Buick?
Me.
Yeah, hazard lights are on.
It's burgundy, but we confuse whether it's brown or, I confuse whether it's brown or burgundy. You wanna take, we're gonna get started.
Okay, everybody, come on.
Hello.
I got
Yoo-hoo.
cables.
Hello, I may need you.
Right.
But hello, Kate.
Yeah, for sure. Feel free to get back to me too, like, you want more about this.
We're gonna get started.
Okay, thank you.
I left my hazard lights on, I didn't even know they were on, so, I'm gonna go out,
Okay.
but,
All right, we are back.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to reconvene after that short break. We have Sergeant Cook doing a presentation on stop forms.
Oh, there we go. It's solid. Hello? Okay.
There you go.
If you guys are using your computers, the stop forms general police order is 2.02.05. If you don't have it or you want to look it up.
Can you send it one more time?
2.02.05. 2.02.05. You're welcome. I'm Sergeant Melanie Cook. I work in the Bureau of Compliance. I was here last time, so I met all you guys, so good morning. The topic today I'm going to talk about is our stop forms. This is the way that we collect the data on investigatory stops and traffic stops. This GPO was effective in July 2nd of 2021. A stop form shall be completed for all investigatory stops and traffic stops conducted in a public place. Supervisor shall approve, reject, return for correction, or disapprove all submitted stop forms for officers under their supervision. So officers have been doing this for a while now. I know that Lieutenant Ryan talked about, we're just going to the when to complete a stop form. Anytime that an investigatory stop is conducted, this includes both pedestrian and vehicle stops that are based on reasonable suspicion. Traffic stops and a traffic violation resulting from a traffic violation that was observed by the officer. So whenever they get pulled over, they get issued a traffic ticket or they interact with that individual. So it doesn't matter if they're issued a citation or issued a warning, they're still going to complete a stop form. Members shall complete a stop form whenever they conduct an investigatory stop or traffic stop in a public place, whether or not an arrest has occurred or a citation has been issued. So the officer initiating an investigatory stop or traffic stop shall complete a stop form for each individual who is the subject of the stop. So whenever they conduct a traffic stop, if there's 4 passengers in the car and they're only interacting with the driver, there's only one stop form that's going to be completed just for that particular driver. They don't have to do a stop form for the other individuals in the vehicle that they didn't interact with. So you might have more people, but if they're not interacted with, they don't have to do one. There are some requirements for what a stop form is not required. Those incidents are consensual encounters, what Lieutenant Ryan talked about earlier. Like I mentioned, vehicle passengers on a traffic stop who are not the subject of an enforcement action. passengers being asked to exit a vehicle simply because the vehicle is being impounded. They don't have to do a stop form for that. Confirmed subjects of an arrest warrant or search warrant. So if they know that this individual has a warrant or, prior to pulling them over or conducting a traffic violation, or traffic stop, they don't have to do a stop form for that. Checkpoints or roadblocks in which an officer detains a person as a result of a blanket activity. This would be your OVI checkpoints, driver license checkpoints. They don't have to do stop forms for those. Detentions that do not result in arrest and that occur during a crowd control situation in which pedestrians are directed to remain at a location or are routed to a different location for public safety purposes. Public safety mass evacuations would be a bomb threat, maybe a gas leak, flooding, earthquakes, etc., or an active shooter situation, an individual actively killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. These are all situations where the stop form is not required. I know we have OVI checkpoints that would be conducted by our usually our CSU units or things like that. What we have it in our GPO, so I believe we do have them. I don't know when.
What's the question?
The driver's license checkpoints.
Very, very rare. Very rare.
I've never actually heard. That's why I said it's in here. I don't know if I've ever actually got it. Operating a vehicle intoxicated, those checkpoints. Okay. We'll talk about the completion of the stop forms. Once I'm done here, I'll actually show you, I have a handout, what they look like when a supervisor checks them so that you can get an idea of the process that the supervisors do whenever they stop the check forms and what the PDF looks like. Officers shall complete and forward all stop forms using the data collection software as soon as practical, but no later than the end of their tour of duty. So once they conduct a traffic stop or, investigatory stop, prior to calling off of that situation, they should be completing the stop form and then notifying their supervisor that, hey, a stop form has been completed, so the supervisor can check it by the end of their tour of duty. There's two options. They have two ways to complete these forms. The zone cars have an MDT version of Brazos. Brazos is it's the name of the system that we use. And then there's also a web-based version of it that you can access on any computer where they can complete the forms. Both forms are exactly identical. It's just that one is on the MDTs, and then I believe it's on most of the computers in the districts as well. And it's very straightforward. It tells you if you miss a spot or where to go back and things like that. Officers shall correct and forward all stop forms returned to them for correction or clarification by the end of their tour of duty. So if a supervisor rejects it, maybe it's missing some information or they're asking for additional information, they're required to have that complete by the end of their tour of duty. And that there's like an email sent to them, or for the most part, I think supervisors notify their officers, hey, I sent you back this stop form. I need you to make corrections and resubmit it. Get some clarification. The supervisor's responsibilities. Supervisors shall approve stop forms that are properly completed as applicable. So the narrative section shall properly document the following. The reasonable suspicion or probable cause justifying the stop. If the subject was required to exit the vehicle, the reason for the exit, the basis and reason that led to any search of a subject and or their vehicle, if applicable. And then they have the option of rejecting stop forms. So supervisors shall reject, return for correction, stop forms that are found to be deficient. Supervisors shall provide the basis for the rejection in the notes field, including but not limited to the following. And I'm not going to read those, but I'll pass out what that looks like so you guys can get an idea. On this, I have actually two. On this first one that you're going to see, if you just want to pass those out, it's going to list This is what the supervisor is looking at whenever they approve it. And on this one, they just have your basic information, the location of the incident, the subject's information. This is the subject of the stop. They ask the question, you get your basic, where the incident occurred at, the time, what district and zone, and then how the stop was initiated. If you see that on the first line, the subject's information, and then whether or not that subject has physical disability. Maybe the officer had prior knowledge of that subject. And then the next is going to be your stop information, the type of stop, number of occupants, how long the stop was observed. And then you're going to see the information related to subject search information and vehicle search information. And then the disposition, whether or not a citation was issued, what the disposition, was a citation issued, and the reason for that citation. This next one that I have is going to give, I have two examples because I wanted to be able to show what it looks like on a supervisor's end whenever an individual was stopped and he's a subject of a search. So it has the information on there, the search type, was the search requested, was consent given, and then it says the justification, and then whether or not any contraband was seized during this interaction. It also has on there the vehicle information, and this one just so happened to have whether a search was performed with the vehicle, whether consent was requested, consent given, and then you have your search type and search justification. So sometimes if a supervisor may have some questions regarding these, about what happened, they can go to their wearable camera system to get further information if they wish. I'll wait till everybody has that. See. Okay. Does anybody have any question on reading those forms? The officers use a drop-down box for listing this information. However, when a supervisor goes in for the supervisor's portion of it to approve or disapprove, they have pre-filled in sections where they can disapprove for whatever reason here, further information. But they also have a spot on there where it says other, and the supervisor can type in the other information that it may be missing or things like that.
Well, could you just maybe tell me, what does ethnicity NH mean? Non-Hispanic.
Yeah. What was the other question? Ethnicity and age?
NH, non-Hispanic?
Yes, yes, NH, thank you, that, non-Hispanic, yep.
I don't know, by any chance, how often are these forms rejected? Do we know?
So I do not have that info. Are you asking rejected into what? So there's three ways that a supervisor there's ways they can reject it. They're either for correction, so that I don't have that information. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
How come it went to, why was it escalated for a search? It was like, I guess.
Well, I don't know. This is just for an example of what the forms look like when a supervisor, this particular traffic stop, other than just using this as an example, I have no additional information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just for this one, I'm just using this particular form just to show you what it looks like on a supervisor's end. As far as the particulars regarding this particular stop, I have no further information.
So in looking at the one that's by Officer Lombardi, when it says basis for probable cause, it just says traffic violation. Whereas on the other one, it actually lists out what the traffic violation is. Are they allowed to just codify it as traffic violation? Because that doesn't tell you anything about what the traffic violation is.
Yeah, they can. They should be putting in more, but traffic violation is okay. They have an option. They're actually filling out the reasonable suspicion, or I'm sorry, they're actually filling out the probable cause on that portion of it. So it's what the officer fills in there, and that's what they put down, then the supervisor approved this, then yeah, they're okay there.
So then, would the citation reason give more information then of what happened? Because it's a little bit strange you can read this whole form and know absolutely nothing about why the person was stopped. And that seems a little strange to me.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in really
So go
fast?
ahead. Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Just jump in really quick. Yeah. So just remember, this is for data collection. That's all this is for. Remember, no, I don't agree with that. Remember, we still have our citation and we have our wearable camera system to really understand. Our data collection, there's a whole team at the Justice Center that specifically looks at this type of information. And they can tell us how many traffic stops, how many instances of reasonable suspicion, that type of thing. This is just to get a better understanding of overall crime, not necessarily even a crime analysis, just an overall big picture of why police officers are stopping individuals. Sorry.
Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, and just, this is an example. I don't, I can't comment on this particular traffic stop. It's just, I wanted to show you what a supervisor sees on their end, okay?
What's
So,
typical? Is it more typical to have them actually list the reason, or is it more typical to just put this generic traffic stop in there?
right, they should be listing. The reason for that is that this is their basis for probable cause, whether they ran a red light or they failed to use their turn signal, they should be putting it in there. So just be aware, I don't know particulars on that traffic stop, but as far as an example, just to show you what supervisors use.
But it does say under traffic violation, it does also say no tail lights, spit.
Yeah, there's two, she's looking at the other one.
The other
Yeah.
one.
Oh,
I have a
that's just
question.
great.
Go ahead.
Are the things that are longer phrases, are they being typed out by hand, or is it a drop down menu?
It's a drop down menu.
Okay, so that means for Ms. Benito's question,
Mhm.
traffic violation is one of the options. It seems
Type of stop, you're either gonna have an investigatory stop or a traffic violation.
No, basis for probable cause, is that? gonna be
Basis for probable cause, they're going to be typing that in.
Typing it, okay.
Mhm.
And then the other question, not my other question. I noticed, and this may be, say someone goes to court for this, and in the court records, I noticed sometimes they, because when they plead it down to a non-moving violation, they actually change the court records.
So,
Is
that
this
I
will
don't
never be
know.
changed? This will never be
No,
changed?
once this record is entered for our data collection with the city, we don't go back and we don't change anything once this is entered by the officer and approved by the supervisor. This goes to the data warehouse and then the data team use that information to collect. I don't know how they're collecting that. I'm just the go-between to make sure that, the officers who are completing these forms that it's being collected and they're doing that. But I can tell you a little bit about how many stops. So I received this information yesterday from the data team. I can't speak on any of this other than the information that they gave us as far as how many forms we're collecting. Any information on the end of the data team having to do with the data and all that, we would have to refer that to them. But I can tell you that since July of 2021, when we started this, there were 33,028 stop forms, and I received this information again yesterday when I completed this PowerPoint. From July to December, because July is when we started, there were approximately 8,896. In 2022, there were 16,464 stop forms completed. 2023 year to date, so yesterday is when she gave me the info, there's 7,668. And then all stop forms, there's been approximately 93% are traffic and 7% are investigatory. The data team has broken it down for the top 3 probable cause for traffic stops is speeding, ran stop light, and they ran the stop sign. The top 3 reasons for investigatory stops is an individual matched a description, what Lieutenant Ryan talked about earlier, drugs and weapon. About 69% of all stops involve citations issued, and about 5% of all stops involved an individual who was arrested. So that came from the data team yesterday, and that's the information they're collecting. Go ahead.
I'm just trying to do the math. 93% are traffic, and one of the top 3 reasons is drugs. And
That's 4 investigatory
right?
stops.
Can you like maybe
So-
like scenarios of like how drugs?
No, it's 2 different things.
It's 2 different things. This one is your probable cause for a traffic stop.
Right.
The reason that the probable cause, the reason to pull the individuals over is they either ran a stop sign or they ran a, stop light, ran a stop sign, or they were speeding.
So there's no overlap. I'm just trying to figure out, at some point, do these traffic stops become investigatory? I'm just trying to figure out if there's a little overlap between, right.
So I can answer that. So when they complete these forms, okay, they're choosing, was this a traffic violation or was this an investigatory stop? You have 2 options when you complete a form. So if you have the GPO out, there's two ways to do that. So they first have to choose, this is a traffic violation, okay? And then all of the information gathered then is simply based off a traffic violation. You can have a traffic violation that turns into an investigatory once you find other things. But for the purpose of this, the initial response was, I did a traffic violation.
That would stay in the traffic category.
That would stay in the traffic category. Yes. If you complete an investigatory, maybe like I think the example was, a house was broken into, you're in the area, you see an individual matching that description, then you're going to put in your probable cause is going to be, there was a call for service for a burglary. This was the description given of the male, and I observed a male matching that, an individual matching that description. And from there, you answer the question. So they are going to be separate because you're not going to go back and change it because whatever your initial one for the probable cause is going to stay the same. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Are there measures in place to make sure that these forms are being completed each and every time a stop is made?
So
that justifies a form.
Yeah. So that's part of. I think I turned this off because it's kind of weird. Okay, so that's part of what I assist with working with the data team is any time that a call comes across to our dispatch, they're going to label it a traffic violation, okay, or a traffic stop. So the data that's being pulled is going to be traffic, and then they're going to make sure that if it was a traffic stop, there's a correlating stop form with that. If you want further information on that, you would have to go to the data team and they can explain to you how all that works. But I do know that if an officer calls a traffic stop, there should be a correlating stop form.
Okay, just to clarify, just make sure I know. So like if I get pulled over because my headlights are not on and they walk up to me and they give me a warning and walk away, technically is that a traffic stop? And
yeah.
There's
going to be a stop form that they interacted with you that day. Yep.
Could I ask, because there seems to be, and it may be that the number is not differentiated enough. It seems like there's a big gap between like 69% of all stops actually get a citation, 31% are not. Is that because a lot of the investigatory, because it's merged together, the traffic and investigatory, is it because the investigatory tabs sometimes don't yield? It just seems like a huge gap.
So that would be something that we would have to ask the data team.
Okay.
Because I can tell you these are what they did, but I don't have further information as to what they're seeing on their end. I would have to refer that to the data team.
And a follow-up, have they done any, I know it's the data team, have they done analysis based on demographics and neighborhoods, a deeper dive?
Yeah, you would have to refer that to them. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, they have. I can answer that.
Okay.
Yes, they have.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Yep.
Can you clarify for the commissioners what they're doing to record stop information when it's a field investigatory stop, not a traffic stop? So if it's non-traffic related
Mm-hmm.
and they are just, for instance, taking it to the level where it's beyond a consensual encounter, right? It's an investigatory stop,
Uh-huh.
but it does not involve a vehicle. How are you tracking that data?
It's the same form. It's just separated by the type of stop. So and they're going to ask you the same information. You know, they're asking the location. You have the incident number. They're going to ask the stop information. What was the type of stop? Obviously, that's going to be investigatory stop. And you know, you're going to answer all these, how, you know, the pre-stop observation, explanation given, things like that. It's all the same. It's just separated by the type of stop.
And just to follow up, because if this is since July, that number seems extremely low if it's inclusive of investigatory stops and traffic stops, 33,000. I mean, a couple of years back, I remember reading divisional data. We were averaging almost 10,000 arrests every 6 months. So shouldn't there be a stop form for every arrest?
No, there are exceptions, which was back on the other page. So what you're, you know, we don't complete a stop form for everything. Let me just see real quick once I get back to my slide here. So there are incidents where you're going to have a traffic stop that doesn't require a stop form. And these are the exceptions that they're given, especially if you know that this individual has a warrant, you don't have to do one. So yeah, the numbers aren't going to be the same when you look at it on that scale. So on that, you would have to take everything into account to see where it's at. Sure, have it.
But just to be clear, they are, if it's not one of those, they're mandated to do a stop form, right?
Yes.
It is mandated, and there's a
They're
check.
required
There's a check for that. So if someone doesn't do the stop form, who's discovering that?
The data team is using the calls for service and how they're labeled, and using the stops that were completed to make sure that they're linked together. That there was
Supervisors on a shift basis?
No.
Thank you.
Shouldn't there be another category here for arrests? A stop form is not required in following incidents. Where? No, that's not right. That's not. What I'm trying to get at is a stop form is not always required to do arrest someone, right?
That's correct.
So shouldn't that be added here?
No, this is just exceptions to an investigatory stop and a traffic violation.
Okay.
So if you get a call for service for whatever reason, it might be domestic violence, some type of criminal act, you don't have to do there's no stop form because it's a call for service.
Yeah,
you're asked to come there, and whether or not you make an arrest or you do a report, you're not required. This is for when you're doing a traffic stop, or you are initiating that. You're initiating that traffic stop, or you're initiating that investigatory stop, you know.
That's all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
So
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I don't mean to
Go ahead.
I just want to clarify one thing that Sergeant Cook said. So as a road supervisor, you are responsible for everything that your officers do. So if you hear that 5 Barney 20 did a traffic stop, as a road supervisor, you're going to be looking for that stop form, okay? Same thing with the wearable camera, same thing with all that. So if I know that my zone car that I'm responsible for has made a traffic stop or an investigatory stop, I know before I leave, I better be seeing that stop form. And if I don't, there better be a reason. Maybe they're held over on a hospital detail and they're going to do it when they get back, something to that effect. But yes, a stop form has to be completed. Not only does it have to be completed, it has to be documented. So we did a traffic stop and a stop form. They're going to write that information in their mobile CAD in their car, so that when I go to pull it to do my review, I'm going to see they did a traffic stop, there's a stop form, and I'm going to look for that as well. And just one other quick thing, we do quarterly wearable camera system inspections. So quarterly, you're going to take all the officers that you have, you're going to view, you can't do every minute because it's just too much, right? But you're going to review a specific portion of each officer's body camera, and then you're going to look for all that information. So if I make an arrest, I want to see an arrest report. I do a traffic stop or investigatory stop, I'm going to want to see a stop form. So there is accountability and checks and balances on why officers did or did not do a stop form.
And that was my bad for misinterpreting the question. So
I'm sorry, and I was gonna say, so these don't require a stop form, but what are the forms that are required for these situations? What is like arrest form or what other form?
well, for these ones, so that they're just saying, so I would have to look at each, each individual GPO regarding like a crowd control, but these are exceptions to that form. We don't have additional forms. If you're asking,
Like, how would these be documented?
in their,
You have a checkpoint, how do you take data for how many people you stop?
I'm sure they have other.
yeah, so I've never done a checkpoint, Lieutenant. I don't know if you've done one. I don't know. So I would have to refer to you for that information. I don't know.
So yeah, so your checkpoint, doing a checkpoint is a very, very administratively taxing endeavor. You have to have very specific guidelines you follow. Like if you're gonna say we're gonna stop every third car, it has to be documented. I saw this car, this car, this car we stopped. This car, this. It's very administratively taxing. So that's tracked that way. Consensual encounters, there's nothing. Okay, because why would a supervisor or anybody really want to know every time you interact with a member of the public, right? Because it might actually decrease the amount of interaction because officers don't want to just continually doing stop forms. Vehicle passengers on a traffic stop. So there's not going to be any stop forms for that, but if there's an arrest warrant, there's going to be a booking sheet. There's going to be other documentation pursuant to that arrest. And then the checkpoints we discussed, crowd control. These are very, if you think about it, if you have a crowd control situation, you can't stop everything that you're doing to get every specific individual's information. So you might have an order to disperse, you may call it a dispersal order and everyone disperses. So you can't do a stop form for that. But let's say I do an investigatory stop on an individual and the individual flees and I don't catch that individual. For whatever reason, maybe they ran, I didn't chase, or maybe I had enough to pursue. I'm still doing a stop form to that effect. I'm just gonna write NA in the columns and fill out the columns that I do know.
Go ahead.
Okay. I have a few questions.
Mhm.
When it's a demographic, is it the officers, all the demographic categories, the officer's perception? Do they ask, like if black, female, not Hispanic, are they asking the person or is it their perception?
Might be on the track.
Yeah. Well, what was it now? Or
Say
what?
I encounter a person.
Their race will be on there. Their for the race.
Right. I just had an incident that I had a traffic ticket and it was when it was handwritten, the race was put as O, which I later frighteningly found out meant Oriental. But then when I looked into the database for common Chinese last names, many of the officers were labeling overtly, Chinese people are East Asians are fairly noticeable by phenotype. They were labeling them as Caucasians because they thought Caucasian meant Asian and not white. So there were Asians and there were other officers, and there seemed to be a group of officers. But so I'm just asking, and then there were times that they were not listed at all. Is it required? Because that would really buy it. We would need that data to, in case something else happened, we would need to know if the officer understood or perceived the person as either a person of color or white or whatever. And there was when I looked at Asian Indian last names, they were often mislabeled as Black Africans. So there seems to be, so I'm just, my core question, it's based on the officer's perception, right? Cultural perception. And not asking, they can't ask the person, right?
Well, you can always ask, they can ask. I don't know so I can't tell you what each individual officer is doing.
But is there training about, because it seems very obvious to me what an East Asian looks like, but maybe not obvious to,
Because this is just on your driver's
Right,
license.
Specific training, I don't think so. Let me just address two things. So generally, you're just going to use what's on the driver's license, or you'll ask the individual as you're filling your form out. But the O is other.
No, it was in the court records as Oriental.
Okay.
There were other.
Okay. Well, that might be the case for the court record. For us, I work closely with the data team. It's other.
Okay, so maybe that it might have changed. My second question is, so what we don't have is that you could have a traffic stop that becomes an investigatory stop, and you only have two options: the traffic stop or investigatory. You're not getting the overlap. Where's the data for when a traffic stop is also an investigatory stop? That would be, because that would certainly heighten kind of the danger for all parties involved, right? Rather than a pure traffic stop. Do they have the option of saying both? That because we don't know how that investigatory stop arose.
There's always going to be an initial, if a person is in a car, you have to conduct a traffic stop in order to interact with that person if they're driving. And then you have to have probable cause to stop that vehicle. So that's your initial stop. It's not going to change simply because as you go along within that traffic stop, now things have evolved and now you're investigating. So it won't change, but the information like subject search information, was there a search report, search type, and then search justification, that's going to give you more as to how it ended up the way it did.
The data that you gave, the 93% and 7%.
Yeah.
The 7% investigatory is. Are there non-vehicle investigatory stops?
Yes.
So that's what it means.
Yeah, so you're just getting the two confused. So when you have the type of stop it's a traffic violation. You're in a car, okay? The from when I was in here earlier, an investigatory stop is kind of the example that Lieutenant Ryan gave earlier, where you have a home that was broken into and an individual is on foot and they match that description. That's going to be your investigatory stop. You stop them, they're matching that description. So they're not intertwined. Okay. You can have a traffic stop that you stop them for running a red light or whatever the violation might be. And then as you're talking with that individual, you realize they don't have a driver's license or whatever the case might be, or you smell alcohol on their, you smell an odor of alcoholic beverage. You want to pull them out. Now you're investigating further on that. You're not going to change your stop form from traffic to investigatory. It's still your initial response is that traffic violation, and that's why you pull them over.
Right, so the 7% that was in that data is non-vehicle related.
Yes.
Okay.
Not non-vehicle related.
Or non-traffic related.
The initial type of stop was a traffic violation of some kind.
Right.
Commissioner Ferguson.
It doesn't matter what it led to.
No, I understand, but what about the 7%?
That initially was the
investigatory.
These investigatory, they.
Right, so
they
not
saw,
traffic related.
Yes.
They're completely two different dimensions.
Yes,
okay.
two different.
An initial.
Yeah.
We got Commissioner Garrett Ferguson, and then we're gonna take Commissioner Benito.
I know I keep walking right in front of me. Go ahead. That's okay.
Kind of a follow-up question to what Commissioner Lane brought up in regards to race. So, and I guess just identity as a whole, because if the court documents would put this category different than police, I guess what is the standard basis of identity that law enforcement uses when pulling someone over? Because I also think of just in like the spirit of pride and people having different gender identities, right? Like what is the standard that they're using when documenting this? Is it based on what is an Ohio Rights Code about identity and what the law says? Is it a cultural thing? Because it seems that that's a very big, I guess, difference, and that term is so outdated. So I'm just wondering, what classifications of identity or race are people utilizing?
Yes. Okay, so there's a couple questions there. Let me see. I can only speak on what we do. So unless Lieutenant Ryan has an idea of what in general police departments do as far as okay, us okay. But this information is gathered from their driver's license. So whatever is listed on their driver's license is what is going to go into this section. As far as the question you had, which relates to individuals from the LGBTQ plus community, we have a GPO on that, and it does explain in there how we interact with members of the LGBTQ plus community. And there is a section on there as to if somebody says, my driver's license says this, I would prefer to, you refer to me as this, that's fine. But then it does explain in there how we document that information.
Okay.
So you might want to check that GPO out. I don't know what the, off the top of my head, I don't know what the number is, but we do have one. And it kind of explains how to interact with those individuals of the community. But as far as the subject's information, we're going to pull that from their driver's license.
Commissioner Benito.
Thank you. Thank you. I know we have 10 million questions.
No, that's
You're doing a great
fine.
job at
Yes,
jumping in.
yes, I'm trying.
The question I had was, so when there's a warrant and so then you don't do a traffic stop form, that's only if the reason why you're pulling someone over is because you know that person has a warrant.
There is a confirmed warrant, yes.
Okay, so,
Yes.
but
If you pull someone over and you find out that they have a confirmed warrant, but you didn't know that prior to that traffic, then you're still going to do a stop warrant. This is a confirmed, is a confirmed warrant.
Okay, cool, thanks.
We just checked the driver's license. There's no race given on the driver's license.
Yeah, I was just.
And so my concern is whether it is intentional or there's too much ambiguity for the officer to perceive. Not having the race marked on an arrest form seems to like it would bring into problems legally if the argument is there was racial bias. The officers can say, I didn't believe this person was Black. I didn't believe this person was Asian. I didn't notice, right? And we have so many instances of so is there, I guess this goes to my other question, is there an audit for officers that habitually leave out important demographic information on their forms? Because I saw that in my analysis that there were many officers marking obviously Far East Asians, which I think are very noticeably Far East Asians. They're distinct in appearance as nothing.
Yeah, Lieutenant Ryan?
So they cannot not fill out that section of the form. So they're going to fill that section of the form either on their descriptive information or they're going to ask. Okay?
I think kind of connected to that is, it's one, I think that it's really hard to tell whether someone's Hispanic because you have Hispanic people who look like me and you have Hispanic people who look like my boyfriend who are Afro-Latino. And you have Hispanic people who look like a lot of different things. And so, yeah, you can literally be any race and be Hispanic because Hispanic is about your, where you're like the countries that you're from. So why is, I would almost argue that this, if you're going just based on officer perception, I have never been asked whether I was Hispanic when I was pulled over. And so this seems to be really concerning to me. I mean, and I think there's obviously cases where people are misreading race and writing incorrect race, but you're basically having people look at someone's name and judging whether they're Hispanic or saying, even if someone, my last name is Benito, somebody might not even read that as Hispanic.
So this is a good thing because this is a hole that we have potentially discovered that we can convey to our officers in our training. Okay, so this is something where if this was brought to me, I would train my officers. Hey, when you fill these stop forms out, this is the information we need to know, and you're going to have to ask these questions, and you're going to have to figure out how to ask these questions in a respectful manner, and you're going to have to say, "Sir, I have to fill out a form about our interaction. I need to know your race and if you have any Hispanic ethnicity." Okay, so this is potentially something. I don't even know if it's potentially. It's probably something that we need to convey to the officers to get a better understanding of the data. Okay.
And as a follow-up, considering bias-free policing addresses race, ethnicity, and religious discrimination, it seems like the categories are not matching the eventual bias-free policing, right? I mean, I don't know how, religion would be even more difficult in some ways to categorize, but I can imagine someone with perhaps hijab or, religious attire that, and is there an option to include that? Especially because the bias-free policing is trying to address discrimination in that dimension too.
Well, I'm doing bias free after lunch, so if there's something we can bring up, I'll be happy to address it.
Okay.
So for the interest of time, we're gonna proceed forward with the PowerPoint. We can always email questions or address in that specific area. I
No,
mean,
that was it, yeah.
okay.
So I was giving the demographics. Is there any other related to go ahead.
I just have it's not a complicated question, but I just want for clarification. So if an officer initiates a stop, I guess traffic stop is clearly the most common, is policy that any traffic stop that's initiated, does it have to be called into dispatch, and that's how you kind of keep track? So any traffic stop, the officer would call in and say, I am making a stop at so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. And then that's how you make sure you can track the data, and that's how you keep track of the stop forms have been completed and submitted?
Yeah.
Okay. Just want
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up, are there any questions, especially from commissioners that we haven't heard from, to ensure that we include all voices? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna check in. Is everybody okay with skipping the break? And because we are a little behind on time, so that we can catch up and utilize use of force with Lieutenant Smith.
It's gonna be Lieutenant Ryan.
Oh, Lieutenant Ryan, I'm sorry.
We're gonna really get to know each other today. Are we skipping break?
Yeah, we're skipping break.
All right. So we're gonna be talking about use of force, but this is gonna be a little bit more than just a regular use of force class. This is gonna be particularly about our de-escalation, how we train de-escalation, and what our policy says in de-escalation. Okay. So similar to our, what time are we breaking for lunch? So I know when to take questions.
Lieutenant, microphone, please.
Sorry.
Scheduled for 11:30.
Okay. I'll break around 11:10, 11:15. That way I can get questions in.
You can finish it with.
Well, no, I can finish my presentation at about probably 11:10 or so, and then I'll take questions.
Okay.
Okay. Because this one is just about our de-escalation policy, it won't be as heavy as my search and seizure one. But so similar to our search and seizure, where we did not have a lot of updates to our policy, we updated all of our policies in 2017 to make our 2 to 3 use of force policies into 5 or 6 very, very specific use of force policies. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history on use of force policies just in general. Police departments in general used to use what was called a force continuum. Okay, it is a very relatively outdated practice that we don't use and that most police departments have really got away from. That use of force continuum was an individual does this and you do this. The individual does this, they're in this category, you do this. And what they found was that was way too specific and way too restrictive and almost over authorizing force when maybe there would be other tactics or techniques that would have maybe been effective. So most departments have kind of got away from that. So in 2017, when we changed our policies, what we did was we put out a preload. So what we had our some of our supervisors throughout the division, from the training section to SWAT, homicide, they shot a video. And in the video, they discussed all these use of force policies, how important they were. kind of the finer points of the policy, and we sent that out to our officers that they had to complete before they came to training. So our initial training was 2 days, it was 16 hours, and it was a combination of lecture and classroom. We had a lecture on, we'll talk about what this means in a little bit, on contact cover for police officers. We had multiple video assessments, which we discussed on break, where we found videos on YouTube. We played them for the officers, which we discussed what the officers did incorrectly, what our officers can do, tips, techniques, and tactics that may have been effective to possibly avert a use of force in certain situations. Since then, we've advanced to using our own wearable camera footage to train our officers. So now what we're doing for supervisor training is we're finding our own wearable camera system, excuse me, where our supervisors did a good job and maybe could have done things a little bit better. And we're now training our supervisors to, hey, this is the standard that we expect. We could have maybe been a little bit better here, and these are some things that you can work on to get better. We also did scenario-based training. What we find is scenario-based training is really our best tool to teach officers because we're giving them a real-world scenario. They have to have all that base coming in. They have to have the preload. They have to have the policies. They have to be tested on those policies to make sure they read and understand them. So that way we can, when they come in, we can utilize their time most effectively, putting them through different scenarios. The way we did that is we have a TI simulator. I don't know if anybody has spoken with you about it. It's a room you go into at our ordnance unit. They have a large screen, and they put you through use of force scenarios on a simulator. There is an instructor that can control what happens in the scenario. So there's different branches. So we could be having an interaction. It ends fine. We could be having an interaction, and the instructor can escalate. Okay, now it's maybe argumentative. Or maybe it started argumentative and then it became conversational. So we have those abilities. We did a simunition. If you don't know what simunition is, it's our own firearms. The receiver is taken off and they put a different color one on, and it shoots little soap projectiles, almost like a little paintball gun. But the benefit is officers can use their service weapon because it's the exact same that we would be using. And in the scenario, if they have to utilize their weapon, they would be utilizing something that they would normally be on the road. So we did a scenario to that effect. We also do taser scenarios where we put role players in special suits. They go through a scenario where an officer may have to deploy a taser. You're going to hear me say may quite a bit. In a lot of our scenarios, what we try to do is we try to give the officer an opportunity, if they do everything correctly, to end the encounter with the individual, either by arrest or whatever the outcome might be, okay? If the officers are not doing something correctly, maybe they're becoming argumentative, or maybe they have an authoritative tone, we can have our role players continue to escalate the encounter until the officer is able to use his or her skills to try to bring that back down. Now, after every encounter, what we do is we have a debrief. And we ask the officer, what do you think went good? What do you think you did wrong? And we have all those conversations in that scenario-based training module. So every time, it's important to understand that every time our officers go through any type of scenario-based training, there's a grading matrix that they have to meet. And if I would have thought of it, I would have brought it for you. But think of an Excel spreadsheet with certain information the officer has to hit to successfully pass the module. So was the officer, you have a professional demeanor and a normal tone of voice. If the officer utilized force, was an appropriate amount of force? Was it proportional? Was it objectively reasonable? Now, if the officer does not meet one of these standards, it is a failure. They'll receive remedial training, and then they'll be given an opportunity to attempt the scenario again, okay? Another thing to remember about our training as well is this is the event itself is an officer can be removed from the field if they fail to successfully complete these modules. So because we are using simunition, we have our officers put their firearms in a locker when they get to training. If they don't successfully complete that, we hold their firearm and we assign them to the training section so they can have remedial training on use of force or de-escalation until they meet those standards, and then they will receive their firearm and be released back to the road. We also do that with basic firearms training as well.
So what do they do in the meantime? So if I fail and then my service weapon's removed, so what do? Do I go on desk duty?
No, you're assigned to the training section. So you're assigned to the training section. We will provide that officer with remedial training based on what he or she needs. And we will allow that person to go through the scenario until they either complete it or they have shown so far off that we're talking about something different. Okay? But what I've seen, because our academy training is so stringent, when officers come down, all we really tell them and all we really expect from them is that they approach the scenario like they would any other scenario on the road. That's all we really expect from them. And it's rare that you get an officer who does something kind of out of bounds. Now, sometimes it's, hey, you did this, you probably shouldn't have done this. Those are little things we can kind of clean up and dial in. But that can be handled usually with remedial training. Okay. All right. So in our training, we talk about de-escalation and what de-escalation is. Okay. Every officer is expected to de-escalate a scenario when safe and feasible to do so. Okay. It's important to remember the safe and feasible, because is it possible an officer just has to react and there will be no time to de-escalate a scenario? Would that be possible? Could be possible, right? Could be, but they're expected to articulate why they did not have an opportunity to de-escalate, and that has to be up to par. It can't be a boilerplate. I couldn't de-escalate, and so I did such and such. No, you have to articulate. A person ran out of a house with a firearm in their hand. And I got out, I saw it, I reacted. There was no opportunity because they were closing the distance, and I had to react right away. Okay?
It should be pretty rare, right?
It is.
You can't, that can be.
Well, I don't want to say rare. In my experience, that scenario I just gave you, the exact same thing happened to me, except it was a taser. We approached the house, a female ran out of the front door with a taser, and she was coming at me. I didn't have to discharge my firearm, but I had to react. I didn't have time to say, please stop. I mean, it's just happening too fast.
You recognize it as a taser?
I did, because I could hear it. I could hear da 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 da. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Just curious, in that situation, was there any way that you know, like it was a mental health? Like,
I'm gonna be honest. I think it was a family trouble where she was fighting with her sister, her living sister.
so when she ran out, she wasn't intentional. You were her target. It just.
Yeah. No, I was her target.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I was her target.
Okay.
She was running at you.
At me. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not gonna sit up here and tell a bunch of stories, but it occurred. I didn't have to use my firearm, but we did have to use force on it. And it's all there is to it. So our de-escalation. So every officer is expected to de-escalate when safe and feasible to do so. Some of the de-escalation techniques that we use are space, time, and distance. Okay, hearing and listening, our strategic communication and our voice commands, and our officer presence. Our officer presence. And that officer presence can mean calling a supervisor. It could mean calling more officers. It could mean calling a CIT officer, which is our crisis intervention team. But officers, with time and feasibility, officers are expected to increase officer presence in a situation. Now, operationally, what I'll tell you is sometimes, unfortunately, increasing officer presence works against us, because we want to increase officer presence so we can get more people there if, unfortunately something were to occur. But sometimes seeing more officers arise, people get more upset. So there's no good answer other than you always want to have more people than you might need. Now, you may have to coordinate with them as well. Like, hey, I need 3 cars, but I want you to go on the north side of East 35th and don't come here until I tell you to. That's something that you can work out among the other officers on your shift, okay? And keep in mind, this is all time and safety contingent, okay? So we go down these techniques. So let's talk about the proactive use of distance, cover, and time. Distance, cover, and time, okay? So we kind of discussed proportionality a little bit. And what proportionality is this is the best scenario I can give you. If there's somebody at that door with a baseball bat, and they say, I'm gonna hit you with this baseball bat, and they're standing there, is it reasonable I use force on that person? No. I probably should be talking to that person, getting an understanding of that person. Now, if the person is running toward me, I may have to use force because that individual has decided to run at me with a baseball bat saying he's going to kill me. Okay, so when we teach the proactive use of distance, time, and cover, one of the things we teach is cover. Okay, cover is something that has some type of protection. Okay, it's not concealment like they're hiding. I would never use this at cover, but I would use that. Okay, same person at the door that I'm talking to, now I want to be behind this. Okay, because if that person advances, at least they have to get through this. Okay, so we want to proactively look. What we train our officers in the academy as they approach a house, they should be looking. Okay, if shots are fired, if something were to occur, where can I look to take some type of cover? Okay, and when we talk about the proactive use of time, one of the most important things that we can teach our officers is time is on your side. Okay, time is on your side. You don't have to rush. You don't have to say, hey, my shift is over an hour and I'm going to put my hands on something. That is not acceptable. Time is your friend. And this happened to me. We had an individual who was threatening to commit suicide sitting in a broken vehicle in the street. And we were there for 3 shifts, A shift, B shift, and C shift until we can get that person out. There was no exigent circumstance. They didn't have a weapon. We knew that they were going to kill themselves. So we had to get them some type of help and we couldn't leave them because of that reason. So we stayed outside the car. We called all of our resources that we had, our CIT, our mobile crisis, their parents, friends, all those things. We proactively used that time until that person came out of the car and was treated for that mental health crisis that they were in. Okay? And hearing and listening is another really good thing as we train our younger officers. And I was talking to Break about it as well, is professional demeanor and a normal tone of voice is not just I'm talking to this person and you're listening. It's actually hearing and listening what they say. And one of the things that we teach is paraphrase, clarify, and give feedback. So, okay, ma'am, you're telling me that you're running late to work today. Is that correct? Yes, it is. Okay, well, I understand you're running late to work, but it does not mean you can do 55 on a side street because there's children that play and we don't want anybody to get hurt. So we paraphrase, clarify, and give feedback when we're hearing and listening. We want to ask questions instead of give commands when possible. Okay, so we ask them questions. Hey, what's going on today? And you begin to develop this rapport. One of the things that we teach our officers is how important the rapport is, right? So I might be interacting with you and you don't like me for whatever reason. My partner's here, they're gonna try. Okay. One scenario where that really is effective is the military. Okay? So I was never in the military. Okay, but you might get a call to an individual's house that is a Vietnam era veteran in the Army, something to that effect. And I was not in the military, but my partner was. So, hey, you have some type of common ground where you're going to build rapport and they can talk. Where did you go to your basic training? Where did you know this person? How long were you in? That type of thing. All right. So now, as we're de-escalating, we need to allow our officers to have an understanding there's different considerations when you're trying to de-escalate a person. Okay. Number one, unfortunately, is the person under some type of influence or some type of drug. And the reason that's number one is because in my experience, there can be a lot of unpredictability. We could be having a great rapport and hey, this is going great, nothing's gonna happen. And then just on a dime, just as quick as that, it could escalate into something else, unfortunately. So it's something that our officers need to consider. Are they under some type of drug or alcohol? The second thing is apparent mental illness. Okay. Now you might ask, how would you know? And there's a lot of different avenues an officer can approach to get an understanding if somebody has had or is having a mental illness. Number one could be, have we been called there before? And when we were called there, what happened? Because when we do a crisis intervention on somebody, that information remains in the system. So dispatch can tell us like, hey, just to let you know, we've had 2 crisis interventions at this location in the last year. Okay, so somebody might not even be the person that we were there to interact with has a mental illness, has some type of mental illness. You can see some maybe medications on the counter that the person might openly tell you, or you can straight up just ask. And asking that type of question, you have to be strategic in the way you ask it, okay? Because you don't want to accidentally offend somebody. So I have a medical background. Before I got on the police job, I was a paramedic for the city. And the way I ask it is the way I train recruits and officers to ask it. Instead of saying, you know, are you, do you have a mental illness or do you have schizophrenia? No, you say, sir, ma'am, do you take any medications for any mental health disorders? So there's a different way to ask that question to get a response, okay? Limited English proficiency or another barrier of language. That one is very, very, very challenging to us because that you're really trying to get to the bottom of some type of situation that could be highly either hostile or escalating, and you can't communicate with somebody. So there's a couple of things we can do there. We can ask dispatch if they have any. First off, you have to assess what language that individual might be speaking, okay? If you can find that information out, and now a lot of times, remember, a lot of these officers, they're working the same zones for years and years and years. So they may have an interaction with this person. They know like, hey, when I go there, this person is going to be speaking X language. So the officers can prepare themselves for that, but let's just pretend that they have either not had interact with them or maybe they are working from somewhere else and got called over. So we can call radio and ask radio if there's anybody available at the language bank, okay? Which they can call, they get somebody who speaks that language. We can ask family. A lot of times family, especially younger family, will be able to use both languages. We have to be really, really, really careful, really careful. Now I say that only because I don't want to dig too far into it, only for an immediate issue like, hey, I have to figure out what's going on. Can you just help me understand? Now, when it gets pushed into investigatory stops, especially arrests, those types of things, we have to have what's called a qualified interpreter, okay? And that we can get through radio. But for the immediacy of the situation, you get called to a domestic violence, there's people injured, there's people crying, there's people all over, and you have to figure out, okay, what is going on? You can use a family member to at least try to help you determine what is occurring until you can make the scene safe and then get your qualified interpreter there, okay? But listen, there's no easy answer to that. Some of our officers speak multiple languages, and you'll just ask radio, hey, is Sergeant Smith working? I know he speaks multiple languages. Hey, could you come over here and talk to this individual and see if maybe you can help us out? Those are really, we also have VRI, which is,
Video relay.
what is it?
Video relay.
I don't think it's relay, but I'll take your word for it.
Video remote.
Remote, okay. That is an iPad we have in each district that deaf or hard of hearing individual can help use to relay to us what information might be going on with them at the time. And then the perceived age of the child is going to be our last thing. So officers have to have an understanding that there is a difference between an adult and a juvenile when you're interacting with them. They might not be understanding what you're asking of them. They might be scared. there's all kinds of different concerns or adjustments an officer has to make when they're dealing with an individual, especially when an individual is highly emotional or think they're in trouble. Okay, so you really have to slow down the pace of the incident and understand what's going on. Slowing down the pace of the incident is if you get nothing else out of here, is what de-escalation is. That's all that it is. It's de-escalation is a big word for slowing down the pace of the incident. And it could be anything. I can't tell you how many members of family I've contacted. Hey, could you talk to this person? Could you ask them to come out of the bathroom so we can speak with them? Or neighbors, or officer of, especially when we are dealing with something very sensitive, like some type of sexual battery. A female victim may want to talk to a female officer. So you call radio and say, radio, is there a female officer that's working that can come over and help us assist? Okay. So these are adjustments sometimes you have to make depending on the individual. I'm getting away from de-escalation, but it's all part and parcel to the bigger picture. All right. And then the last one, and there's not a ton to it, is the increasing officer presence. So we want to ensure that we call if we believe we may have to use force, or if a situation is becoming increasingly volatile and we're not able to slow down the pace. We either want to call a supervisor, right? Because the supervisor is going to assist. And we want to call potentially a CIT officer if we believe there's a mental health emergency occurring. And they have the special training. Have you had CIT training? Anybody just spoke with you about it?
We've been talked to about it
A little bit. So,
40-hour session.
okay. Oh, you are going. Oh, okay. I've been through it. It's very good. They take you out when you go. It's 40 hours. They take you out to the community where you're going to interact with other members of the community. It's very good training. The vast majority of our officers have been through it. So what you'll do is you'll ask radio, if you're not already one, hey, is there a CIT officer available that can come and assist? Okay. That's really, this is more of a de-escalation block than a use of force block. But I just want you to understand that anything that you can use within reason, I guess, to slow down the pace of an incident and help you conclude an event without any type of force is always going to be trained and taught in the training section. So with that, I will gladly answer any questions.
Okay. So maybe we should go around like we did before. Commissioner Reeves.
Thank you, Chair.
Love your
Appreciate
voice. I
that.
want to hear it.
I just got one quick question. Like when I was a correction officer, we were trained to stand at what's called a safety stance.
Okay.
It's like your feet in the L shape. It didn't look safe to me.
Okay.
If somebody was standing in front of me that way, I would be intimidated.
Okay.
But my point is, are you all trained to stand in a certain way? Like, for instance, you mentioned you come across a person who you don't know what language they're speaking.
Sure.
You don't even know what to say when you call in. Like, hey, does somebody speak? I don't know what they're speaking. So, you position your body in a way that's non-threatening. Like, hey,
sure.
While you're trying to get help.
So there is a term, and off the top of my head, I can't remember the term that we use, but we want to have our firearm away. So that's the way we kind of want to start. Okay. I'll piggyback off that. And I mentioned contact cover earlier. So contact cover is a concept when you have two officers and you're dealing with one individual. Okay. So this also goes into clear communication. Okay. So if you're an individual, I might be the contact officer talking to you. This is going to be my cover officer. They're going to be kind of watching, looking around, making sure everything is, but they're not going to really interact with you very much. The reason, there's multiple reasons, but the important reason, if I have to give you a command and then he starts giving you commands, I may say, put your hands up, and he may say, drop, give me your wallet. Right? So the way we train is the contact officer is contacting you and speaking with you, and the cover officer is there just in case they need help. If there is a transition we need to make, we make it together. So like, okay, I'm gonna let my partner speak with you, and then I become the cover officer, and this becomes the contact officer. Okay? Does that answer your question? Okay.
Commissioner Kennedy, Chair Ridgway.
Is there a policy, I'm sorry, is there a policy within the department in terms of how many officers, or cars will be on site, you know, for a stop? Because we see that a lot, sometimes you see 5 and 6, and
Okay.
it's no big deal.
Okay.
And then what is beginning to happen is that community members are beginning to video that. They're beginning to take pictures of it.
Sure.
So is there a policy that dictates how many officers can
Sure.
be on site?
So there is not an official policy, like we discussed in our search and seizure. We don't like to put those types of specific guidelines, just because when we are dealing with real world scenarios and so many different things can happen. What I'll say is, in training, we like to, if you're going to make it some type of felony traffic stop, like you know this individual just committed a murder, just shot somebody, that type of thing, you want at least 3 cars there. 2 are going to be stopping. 1 individual is going to be your contact officer, and the other one's just going to be hanging back just in case they're needed for anything. For a regular traffic stop, let's say you ran a red light, it's probably just going to be 1 car. It's not written in stone. It's probably going to be 1 car. Now, a couple things to remember, especially when we have so many younger officers, is we have officers training, okay? So the reason I bring that up is it might look like, hey, why is there 3 cars here for 1 person who ran a stop sign? Well, it could be a training officer and his or her FTO here, and then the primary cars back here, or for whatever reason. It might look, hey, this doesn't look good. But that's kind of our responsibility when we do get those pictures to look at like what's actually going on here and allow the officers an opportunity to like, what were you thinking? And then they'll say, hey, I had a probationary officer. He hadn't written any tickets. We had to get him some experience. Or he's going to write the ticket and our other officer is going to tow the vehicle because the person didn't have a driver's license. So we can kind of gain more experience just out of that 1 stop.
Commissioner Van Leer, Commissioner Wong.
Can you explain the simulator a little bit more? What I mainly want to know, is there, first of all, like physical, like person-to-person training for use of force? So it's not like a total simulation.
So we have both.
Okay.
It's a combination of actually 3, believe it or not. So sometimes me and my partner will go into a house where we have to interact with an individual and a deadly force encounter occurs. Okay? That's simulition. Option 2, full simulator, where officers are going into a room and all they're getting is the screen. That's option 2. And then if we really want to get something across is option 3, where we have the simulator and we stop it and insert a role player. Okay? Because we're bound, unfortunately, by the software of the thing. We're like, man, this would be really good if we could add just this little piece. So we'll actually stop it and we'll bring a role player in to give us that little extra piece.
Is there just kind of continual training for an officer that once physical force is applied, how to de-escalate or control the situation rather than escalate it? Because it seems like, because the adrenaline's pumping and things like that.
Sure. So only the amount of force necessary to achieve a lawful objective. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2 is, and I actually talk about a little bit after lunch, is our, once the subject is secure, all uses of force end. And then the third thing of that is our duty to intervene, where there's an officer there, they might see something, maybe the situation's under control, but an officer is still doing something, and that officer has a duty to intervene and stop that officer from doing that. That officer, if the officer does not intervene, they are just as responsible for that inappropriate use of force as that officer that applied the force. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Commissioner Schumer.
No question.
Commissioner Gary Ferguson. Commissioner Benito.
They're just trying to go to lunch.
So unfortunately, here I am. So, I was just wondering, generally how officers respond to, hey, little man, he's getting so big. How officers respond to the concept of de-escalation, like obviously I know you're not going to be like, yeah, they hate it, but just
Sure.
maybe what are the things that they like about it?
Sure.
What are some of the questions that they have? What are maybe things that they struggle with?
That's all very good questions. What I'll say is a couple things. De-escalation has been around since long before, forever. We just didn't call it that. What you're going to find is, and what I found out, and I'm sure Commissioner Chur has found out, is officers are not great at articulating things in reports. Okay, they're just not. They rush through it. They want to get back to doing what they're doing. They don't do a good job. Okay. What we have been trying to do as much as possible is, and I hate to use this term, but telling the officer, you need to get credit for all the good work that you're doing. If you're doing 5 of these things, you need to write these 5 things and what you did. Because what happens is, hey, Officer A tells me, oh, I'm up on charges for this thing. And I ask him, okay, what happened? And then you start just talking about it. And then I say, was that in the report? What you just told me, that little end piece. And like, well, no, I didn't think it was necessary. I'm like, no, that's important. That's an important part. Okay. That is an important part of it. So the officers are in my experience, how about this? I can only speak for me. The last thing I want to do is put my hands on somebody. So officers are very, very open to the idea of, okay, what kind of tips and techniques can I use to get that? Now, most of the things I teach them, they already know and are doing. I'm trying to teach them to maybe do it a little bit better, button some things up, and make sure we're articulating those things on paper. Okay?
Oh, Commissioner Adams.
Oh, he's got a question.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the community?
Yes. How you doing? Thank you again. I go to the Metro Parks quite often, and I see the officers down there doing assertive monitoring of people's behavior. And I think that, as my last comment, a lot of things have got out of control in our community in certain areas, gas stations and driving particularly. And I think that I want to ask, is it possible that a proactive type of assertiveness can be implemented into the training and behaviors of the officers to kind of curb some of these behaviors in our community? Kind of like a use of force, but not physical force.
If I understand your question correctly, the question is everything has a balance, right? Everything has a balance. We want to make sure that our presence is known, that we're out there. If somebody needs something, we're available. But we also don't want to overly flood an area, maybe make people feel uncomfortable, those types of things. So there's not unfortunately, there is a balance with everything. I would say that, I don't know if you're referring to the Metro Parks Police or not, or Cleveland Police, I'm not sure. Because now, keep in mind, there are several police departments that operate within the city, okay? So if it's Cleveland Police, more than likely that they are there, let's just say Edgewater, okay? If they didn't get called there for a reason, they're just doing a special attention in the area. What a special attention is just police officers in the area observing behavior, maybe finishing up some paperwork that they had from their last run, something like that. But they are visually in an area to respond if needed or answer questions, those types of things. Did that answer your question?
Somewhat, but I was speaking about the park authorities, but I was saying, could the officers of the Cleveland Police be more proactive in dealing with these areas in which our people are congregating and making it uncomfortable for people to pump their gas and just have a safe trip in and out of their house. Maybe you guys can place officers with special abilities to speak, to be cordial with the community, to engage assertively, but keep it safe.
Can I just jump in with this? Thank you. Yeah, so absolutely. One of the things that the chief has instituted is park walk and talks. Okay, so not only do we do special attentions in the area, we actually get out of our car, we go interact with members of the community, we go into businesses, we make it. Saying I want to make an area uncomfortable is not language that I would necessarily use. I just want to make sure that we are available if somebody needs something, okay? And the park walk and talk is a good way to interact with the community, let people know we're there, those types of things.
Okay, so we have Commissioner Benito.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to, I'm not trying to look at you. Do you know about the district policing committee? So each of the districts of the Cleveland Division of Police has these meetings that happen monthly, correct? And it gives, community members an opportunity to talk with the leadership in those districts. I think some of the questions that you're asking, about concerns about, what's going on in your neighborhood, that might be a good place for you to actually be able to talk to the leadership of that district. And so our staff, could potentially, you should be able to find it online, but our staff could also potentially get you the information for, for the district that you're talking about, so that you can go to those meetings and have a conversation with them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Chair Ridgway.
Yes, Lieutenant Ryan, I want to take a step back from your your very first presentation when
Okay.
you were talking about the Miranda
Yes.
ruling. You did not speak on deaf and hard of hearing and juveniles on that. I mean, you came down to that.
Did I go through the
You
end?
didn't. So I just wondered, could you cover that briefly?
Sure. So for deaf and hard of hearing, no different than our de-escalation, we have our VRI, okay, where we can utilize the iPad to make sure that we are getting information across. And actually in our policy, we have a Miranda for juveniles. And given to each officer when they come through training is a business card. It's not to give out, but it has that actual verbiage on the business card. So instead of, do you understand, this is not verbatim, but instead of you have the right to remain silent, it's you understand that if I ask you something, you don't have to tell me.
Okay.
It's really broken down.
It's a little bit different.
It's very,
That's why I
yeah.
wanted you to cover it.
It's very different, and I don't want to quote it verbatim just because it's instead of 5 lines, I think it's like 9, because it really is like, hey, you don't have to tell me anything. Do you understand that, correct? And then, correct or no response. Okay.
Thank you.
So we have a few more minutes. Are there any last questions?
Did you have any outstanding questions from the stop forms or from the last one? I'll be happy to. Stop forms. The important thing to remember about the stop forms is it's just collecting data. That's all it is. And officers cannot have to fill out the different fields before it's submitted. So if they don't fill out the form correctly, they can't turn it in. Okay.
Well, I think daily life is not always linear, not always one-sided. So I think our training really has to even establish some of the things for the officer to understand. They are definitely not an expert. They probably need to ask questions friendly, nicely. Just like they are still a civilian. For example, I do have a big problem that if we are collecting data, we need accurate data. Now, interpretation will be another story, but if the data itself is not objectively correct, it will not be helpful. Just for example, all of the things we have talked about, the identity of each person. For example, in your presentation, even you use the term subject, but it doesn't make people feel personal or friendly. It makes people feel we are objectified. So this is something you guys can think about in your training as well. Now, cultural competency right now is very, very important. It's a very hurtful for the people in the community. They already think they may not be visible, and now they are even being misidentified. Just call us Asian. Don't call us white. If that's really serious, we have to talk about race. I believe in only human race. But if you really want to collect data that way to help the disadvantaged populations in our community, please get them correctly. So you can get it directly by asking, but friendly, politely. So I think really the ongoing training, we really have to put the human aspects into that. Being an authority is good when the situation acquires it, but when it goes to mental health conditions, people's identity, doesn't matter it's a gender or it's a race or whatever you want to talk, they have to learn how to communicate with the community on an equal level. That means for a split few seconds, don't think they are the authority. Think they are just somebody don't know, asking a question. Just like how teachers treat students. Some of the students may be smart, already know the answer. Some of them may not yet. So I think we should really put the human-centered aspect into our training and also in our policies. That will start really helping to balance out the equity issue as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just address two quick things. So one of the things that we teach, is treat everyone you encounter like you would expect your mother to be treated. Not the way you would expect, the way you would expect your mother to be treated. Okay. And the other point I'll make is remember we've only been collecting this data since 2021, and that's no excuse. However, we are learning. If everything was perfect, we probably wouldn't be here, right? So we can find holes and we can fill those holes, and then we'll find some other things. Okay. Anything else?
Well, the time is 12:28. Thank you so much for
11:28.
what I said. Oh, it's time for lunch, right? So it is 11:28. Thank you so much for coming to share that information, and we look forward to all the information sessions after, as well as commissioners for taking their time and community. We will reconvene at 12:30 for lunch.
Thank you, everyone.